She said my face was dirty like a doormat. Annie tried to swallow her sobs when Richard Whitmore found her curled up on the back balcony of the mansion. The cold evening wind slipped through her thin sleeves. The vast garden below had already sunk into the pale gray of dusk, but the girl's eyes were still red and wet with tears. "Is that true, sir?" Annie asked softly, her voice catching. "Does my face really look like a doormat to you?" Richard froze. "What?" Annie immediately lowered her head, twisting her hands tightly together. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." Richard stared at the girl for a few seconds. Then he slowly sat down beside her, as if the strength had gone out of his legs. He lifted a hand to cover his mouth, his eyes widening in shock. "Annie," he said very slowly, trying to keep his voice calm. "Who told you that? Who would say your face was as dirty as a doormat?" Annie pressed her lips together and looked down at the garden below. The flower beds were perfectly trimmed. The rows of trees stood in silence, as if they had heard everything. But the girl did not answer right away. "Annie," Richard called again, this time more gently. "Tell me." After a long moment, she whispered. It was Miss Victoria. Richard's hand, still near his mouth, slowly lowered. Victoria Langford, his fiancée, the woman who always sat beside him at charity dinners, smiling at the right moments, remembering every guest's name, sending thank you cards in elegant handwriting. The woman who had stood beside him through a difficult year, gentle and composed, as if she had brought a new warmth into this house. Richard turned away and looked over the balcony railing, toward the long lawn and the rows of trees surrounding the Whitmore estate. At first, there was no anger on his face, only confusion. "Victoria said that?" he asked. Annie gave a small nod. Richard let out a heavy breath, like a man who had just heard something too impossible to believe. "That doesn't sound like her at all." Annie's expression changed slightly, only slightly. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She did not try to prove she was right. She simply looked down at her hands. Richard kept staring into the distance, as if trying to find the woman he thought he knew. "Victoria has always seemed kind," he said, almost speaking to himself. "Gentle. She treats me well. She speaks politely to the staff. She asks about Mrs. Bell's knee. She sends flowers when someone in the house is sick. I've seen her be kind to people." Annie swallowed hard. Richard turned back to her. "Are you sure there wasn't some kind of misunderstanding?" Tears welled in Annie's eyes again. She nodded, but this time, the gesture carried a quiet kind of pain. "I heard her clearly, sir." "What happened?" Annie took a trembling breath. "I was cleaning the back hallway near the old storage room. There was oil on the floor, probably from one of the gardening tools leaking. The workers moved some boxes through there yesterday, so dust was everywhere. I tried to clean it quickly before Miss Victoria came through, but I must have gotten dirt on my sleeve. Maybe on my cheek, too." Richard looked down at the sleeve she had used to wipe her tears. There was a faint smear of dust on it and a dark streak of oil. Annie continued, her voice growing softer. "She came in while I was carrying the rags to the laundry room." She stopped. First, she looked at my uniform, then my hands, then my face. She paused for a moment. She said, "Look at this girl." Then she laughed under her breath. "Not loudly, sir. Just," Annie shook her head, as if there were no gentle enough words to describe such cruelty. Like I was something filthy she had found in the corner of the house. Richard's jaw tightened. Then she said my face looked like the black doormat in the mansion. After that, she said, even that doormat looked like the cow shed outside. Richard's mouth parted slightly. For a few seconds, he could not say a word. He raised his hand to his mouth again, his eyes fixed on Annie, as if he needed to make sure he had heard her correctly. This time, there was no confusion left on his face. It was shock, and behind that shock, shame was slowly rising. "She said those exact words?" he asked. Annie nodded. "Yes, sir." "The cowshed?" "Yes, sir." Richard turned and looked toward the house. The Whitmore estate had not even kept cattle for years. The old shed at the far end of the property had been turned into a storage building long ago. Annie wiped her face again, then immediately looked ashamed for doing it. "I know I was dirty because I was cleaning. I know I didn't look clean at that moment, but I didn't think..." Her throat tightened. "I didn't think my face looked like something that should be thrown outside." Richard leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The cold air filled his lungs, but it did nothing to calm the ache rising inside him. "No," he said, his voice low but firm. "Your face does not look like that. Not now." Not ever. Annie tried to nod. Before Richard could say anything more, hurried footsteps sounded behind them. The balcony door opened. Clara, a young maid, stepped out with a stack of neatly folded white towels held against her hip. "Annie, there you are," Clara said, slightly out of breath. "What are you doing out here?" Mrs. Bell said the dining room linens need. She stopped suddenly when she saw Richard. "Oh," Clara immediately straightened. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here." Richard turned to her. "It's all right, Clara." Clara looked at him, then at Annie. Concern softened her face at once. "Annie, have you been crying?" Annie quickly shook her head. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Clara took one step closer, then stopped, as if remembering herself. "Miss Victoria was looking for you earlier. I thought maybe—" She lowered her voice, but not enough to keep Richard from hearing. Was it because of what she said? Richard's gaze sharpened immediately. "What did she say?" he asked. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again. Annie looked at her, her eyes silently pleading. Richard stood up. "Clara," he said, not harshly, but with the weight of a man who needed the truth. "What did Victoria say?" Clara tightened her grip on the stack of towels. "Sir, I don't want to cause trouble." "Neither do I." Richard looked straight at her. "But if someone in my house spoke to Annie that way, then trouble has already happened." Clara looked deeply uncomfortable. "I only heard part of it." "What part?" She glanced at Annie. Miss Victoria said Annie's face looked like the black doormat. Then she said something about the cowshed. Clara's cheeks flushed with second-hand shame. "I thought it was awful. I wanted to say something, but Miss Victoria was angry, and She lowered her head. "I'm sorry." Annie quietly looked down. Richard's voice dropped very low. "So it's true." Clara gave a small nod. "Where is Victoria now?" "In the kitchen, sir, or nearby. She was on the phone when I came upstairs. She told me to find Annie and send her back to work." As soon as the words left her mouth, Clara seemed to realize she had said too much. Her eyes widened, and she pressed her lips together. "I should go," she said quickly. "These towels, Mrs. Bell is waiting." Richard looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Clara nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Then she quickly slipped back inside and closed the door behind her. The balcony suddenly felt colder than before. Richard stood still. Annie remained seated, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as if she might fall apart if she loosened them even a little. "She'll be angry if she knows Clara told you," Annie whispered. Richard turned to her. "That is not what I'm worried about. She'll say Clara misunderstood too. Two people do not misunderstand the same cruelty." Annie said nothing. Richard looked at the girl's face, at the tear tracks that had not yet dried, at the dust on her sleeve, at the tired dignity of a child who had spent the day cleaning a grand house, while someone inside it had tried to make her feel small. He had known Annie's mother, Eleanor Carter, for more than 12 years. Eleanor had once saved this house from a robbery that, if successful, would have cost Richard more than money. It would have taken the last keepsakes he had from his parents. He had thanked Eleanor, paid her generously, helped her try to start a small business. When that business failed and Eleanor came back in shame, he welcomed her without judgment. But in that moment, Richard suddenly understood something. Gratitude could not simply be a beautiful memory stored away in the past. Eleanor had left Annie in this house while she went back to Mississippi to rest and recover her health. She had trusted him, and he had assumed that trust meant Annie would be safe. He had been wrong. "Mr. Whitmore," Annie said softly, "please don't make things worse. My mother needs to rest. If Miss Victoria gets angry, she might say I'm not fit for the job. Then my mother will blame herself." Richard's face changed. The shock was still there, but behind it, something steadier began to take shape. "Annie, listen to me. You did nothing wrong, but I'm sitting here instead of working. You were hurt. I still have to keep working. No one should be forced to keep working after being treated like that." He lowered his voice, each word slow and clear. "Your mother protected this house when I was not here. I will not stand by and let her daughter be humiliated while I am." Tears rose in Annie's eyes again, but she tried to sit perfectly still. Richard walked toward the balcony door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. "I'm going to speak with Victoria." Annie sprang to her feet. "Sir, please don't." "I won't act carelessly," he said, "but I will not pretend I didn't hear this." "She knows how to seem kind," Annie whispered. "When you're there, she changes." Richard turned back and looked at her. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. He had only taken a few steps toward the dressing room when a voice rose from downstairs, near the servants' staircase. It was Victoria's voice. But it was not the gentle voice Richard was used to hearing at dinner parties, not the soft voice that had once made him believe this house was about to become warmer. This voice was low, sharp, and full of impatience. That girl is starting to become a problem. Richard stopped, and in that very moment, the house he had once believed was peaceful began to reveal the truth it had been hiding for far too long. Richard returned to the balcony. Annie was still standing near the railing, trying to wipe her tear-streaked face with the same sleeve stained with dust and oil. She looked as if she wanted to disappear before anyone in the house realized she had been hurt. "Come inside," Richard said. Annie immediately stiffened. "Sir, I should go back through the servants' hall. I don't want Miss Victoria to see me looking like this." "She has seen enough," Richard replied, "and she has said enough." Annie hesitated at the door. The warmth from the hallway brushed against her face, but her feet did not move. Richard suddenly understood. To Annie, in that moment, the cold balcony outside felt safer than the warm house behind the door. He lowered his voice. "You are not in trouble, Annie." She gave a small nod, though she clearly did not believe him. Still, in the end, she followed him inside. They walked together down the back hallway. Richard moved ahead in his dark suit, quiet but steady. Annie followed a few steps behind him in her dusty work uniform, her hands pressed tightly to her sides as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Richard deliberately slowed his pace so she would not have to hurry after him. "Does your mother know Victoria has spoken to you like this before?" he asked. "No, sir." "Why not?" Annie looked down at the floor as they reached the stair landing. "My mother has already suffered enough. I don't want to place my pain on her shoulders too." Her answer made Richard stop. He placed his hand on the stair railing. The old dark wood had been polished smooth by time, worn down by the hands of so many people. Servants, guests, relatives, and strangers who had passed through this house. Richard had walked up and down those stairs for years. Yet he had rarely thought about the hands that had quietly kept this house running. Hands that cleaned, repaired, cared, and endured. "Your mother once saved this house," he said. Annie looked up at him. "She told me not to talk about that." "I know she would say that." Richard looked at her for a long moment. "And that is exactly why it matters." Annie did not answer. They had just reached the narrow hallway above the kitchen when Victoria's voice rose from below, loud enough to strike the walls and echo back. "I don't care how loyal her mother once was. Loyalty does not mean that girl gets a permanent place in my future household." Annie stopped abruptly. Richard stopped too. Victoria was no longer using her usual soft voice. Her words carried up through the servants' staircase, sharp, irritated, and completely stripped of the polished warmth she always carried into the sitting rooms. A brief silence passed. Then Victoria continued speaking on the phone. "No, you don't understand. Richard gets sentimental about people like that. Eleanor found a few keys years ago, and ever since then he has acted as if that woman saved his life. Fine, she helped him, but he paid her. More than she deserved, honestly. Then he gave her money to open some little food shop, and she lost all of that too." Annie held her breath. Richard turned slightly to look at her. The girl's face had gone still. No tears. No trembling. No reaction. That stillness unsettled him more than crying ever could. Downstairs, Victoria gave a soft laugh. "And now her daughter is here, looking at me with those big wounded eyes, as if I am supposed to pretend she belongs in this place while I'm preparing for my wedding. I want her gone before I move in. I don't need Eleanor's failed child wandering around my house in that apron." If Annie's pain touched your heart, please like this video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Your voice matters here. And if you believe every person deserves dignity and justice, please subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. A tiny sound escaped Annie's throat, so small it was almost nothing at all. Richard felt something inside him move toward the edge, not his heart. Something colder, something harder. The part of him that had once sat across from liars who smiled politely. The part of him that knew when a mask had fallen, and that there was no use pretending he had not seen the face beneath it. He stepped down one stair. Annie quickly reached out and touched his sleeve. "Please," she whispered. Richard turned back. "She is already angry," Annie said, her voice painfully small. "If she sees me with you, she will say I caused this." Richard lowered his voice. "You did not cause this, but she will say I did." Before Richard could answer, Victoria's voice rose again. "I'll handle it." If Richard asks, I'll say the girl was overwhelmed. Maybe she broke something. Maybe she stole something. People usually believe what sounds reasonable, and girls like Annie always look guilty when they're nervous. Richard's face hardened at once. Annie's hand slowly slipped away from his sleeve. For a moment, neither of them moved. The entire house seemed to hold its breath around the poisonous words rising from below. Then Richard said, "Follow me." Annie shook her head. "Sir, no more hiding in hallways while someone slanders you like this. It will make things worse. Not while I am standing there." He did not speak loudly, but there was such certainty in his voice that Annie fell silent. She looked at him. And for the first time since they had been out on the balcony, she seemed to understand that she was no longer being asked to defend herself alone. Together, they walked down the stairs. At the bottom, the kitchen door stood slightly open. Victoria was inside, one hand resting on the stone counter, the phone held close to her mouth. Her cream-colored dress stood out against the dark kitchen cabinets. She looked exactly like the future mistress of the Whitmore estate, except her voice had already betrayed everything. Richard pushed the door open and stepped inside. Victoria turned sharply, and the change happened almost instantly. Her shoulders relaxed, her lips parted into a gentle smile. The cold woman from the phone call disappeared so quickly that Annie almost doubted her own ears. "Richard," Victoria said, lowering the phone. "Darling, I didn't hear you come in." "No," Richard replied. "You didn't." Victoria's eyes moved to Annie, who stood just behind him. For one brief second, the smile vanished from her face. "Annie," she said in a soft voice. "There you are. I was wondering why the table linen still hadn't been washed." Richard stepped farther into the kitchen. "We heard you." Victoria blinked. "Heard what?" "Enough." Her hand tightened around the phone. "I was confiding in a friend. Wedding stress, that's all. You know how things can sound when they are overheard out of context." Richard looked at her for a long moment, then put it into context. Victoria gave a small laugh, but it died quickly in the quiet kitchen. "Richard, please, don't do this in front of the help." Annie flinched. Richard did not take his eyes off Victoria. "Her name is Annie." Victoria's smile remained on her lips, but something behind it had begun to crack. "Of course," she said. "Annie." Richard looked down at the phone in her hand. "End the call." Victoria seemed ready to object, but when she saw his eyes, she stopped. She lifted the phone. "I'll call you back." Then she ended the call and placed the phone on the counter. The kitchen suddenly became strangely quiet. Richard stood between the two women, feeling the past and the present collide in the same room. Eleanor's loyalty, Annie's tears, Victoria's contempt, and his own blindness. He turned to Annie for a moment. "You do not have to say anything unless you want to." Victoria let out a breath, as if her patience were being tested by something ridiculous. "This is absurd. The girl is upset because I corrected her. That's all." She came upstairs covered in dust and oil, and nearly brushed against my dress. "I only told her to be more careful." Richard's voice remained calm. "Did you tell her that her face looked like a black doormat?" Victoria's eyes flickered. "I didn't mean it like that. That is not what I asked." Annie stood still, barely daring to breathe. Victoria looked from Richard to Annie, then back to Richard. Her voice softened, carefully laced with hurt. "I can't believe you are questioning me like this." Richard looked at the woman he had once intended to marry, and at last, he heard the lie beneath every gentle word she had ever spoken. "I'm the one who can't believe it," he said slowly. "That I waited this long to do it." Victoria held Richard's gaze for a moment too long, then looked away first. That small defeat did not soften her. It only made her careful. She placed both hands on the marble island and drew in a slow breath, the way she did before speaking at charity luncheons. Richard had seen that breath before. He had admired it once, thinking it showed grace under pressure. Now he recognized it as preparation. "Richard," she said, "I understand how this looks." "No," he said, "I don't think you do." Annie stood near the kitchen doorway, close enough to hear everything, far enough to leave if fear won. Her face was still marked by tears and the faint smear of oil from her sleeve. She kept her eyes lowered, but Richard could feel how hard she was trying not to shake. Victoria noticed too. Her mouth tightened. "I was frustrated," she said. "The house is under pressure. The wedding is under pressure. People are coming in and out every day, and I am trying to keep everything from falling apart." Richard glanced around the kitchen. The copper pans were hanging in a neat row. The dish towels were folded. The silver tray for dinner service waited near the sink. Nothing was falling apart except the story Victoria wanted him to believe. You were frustrated, he repeated. Yes. She touched her fingers to her temple. And Annie came upstairs looking disheveled, near my gown. It startled me. I said something sharper than I should have. Sharper? Victoria looked at Annie, then quickly back to Richard. Poorly chosen. That is all. Annie's fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. Richard saw it. Annie, did it sound like poorly chosen words to you? Annie looked up, startled to be asked. Victoria answered before she could. She is emotional right now. I don't think she should be pushed into reliving it. Richard did not raise his voice. I asked Annie. The kitchen went still. Annie swallowed. No, sir. It didn't sound like an accident. Victoria's eyes cooled. Of course you would say that now. Richard turned his head slightly. Careful. What? I'm not allowed to defend myself? You are, but you are not allowed to make her pay for telling the truth. Victoria laughed once, quietly. The truth. That word is doing a lot of work tonight. Annie lowered her head again. Richard felt his patience narrow. Tell me what you meant when you said girls like Annie always look guilty when they're nervous. Victoria's face changed. Not much, just enough. You were listening to my private call. I was walking in my own house. That call was not meant for you. That is the first honest thing you've said. Victoria stepped away from the island, the soft expression gone for a second before she pulled it back into place. I was speaking carelessly to a friend. People say things when they're upset. People reveal things when they think no one important can hear them. Her cheeks colored. That is unfair. So was what you said about Eleanor. At the mention of Annie's mother, Annie looked up. Victoria's eyes flicked toward her, then away. I never insulted Eleanor. You called her a failure. I said her business failed. That is a fact. You used it to reduce her. Victoria folded her arms, then seemed to remember that posture did not suit the role she was trying to play. She let them fall again. Richard, Eleanor is a good woman. I have never denied that. But you have turned gratitude into obligation. You feel guilty because she helped you once, and now everyone connected to her is untouchable. Richard stared at her. Helped me once? Victoria's voice sharpened. Yes, once, years ago. And since then you have paid her, rehired her, forgiven her failed business, taken in her daughter, and now you are standing in your kitchen interrogating your fiancé because a maid's daughter cried on a balcony. The words rang out before she could dress them in softness. Annie took a small step back. Richard heard it too. The phrase, a maid's daughter, not spoken as description, but as rank. He walked to the end of the island, putting himself more directly between Victoria and Annie. Eleanor did not just help me once, he said. She protected this house when people inside it were planning to betray me. Victoria sighed. I know the story. No, you know the version short enough for dinner conversation. He turned slightly, not to perform for Annie, but because the truth deserved the air. She noticed the side door had been tampered with. She found mud outside my study. She saw a man trying to reach keys he had no business touching. She called me before anything was stolen. She kept the staff calm until security came. The men outside had my travel schedule and enough information to empty my office. Victoria looked unmoved, and I'm glad she was observant. Richard's eyes hardened. My father's watch was in that office. For a moment, something passed across Victoria's face, but it was irritation, not empathy. Richard, I am not dismissing your father's watch. You just did. No, I am trying to make you see proportion. Eleanor did a good thing. But this house cannot remain emotionally indebted to her forever. Annie's mouth trembled, but she said nothing. Richard looked at Victoria as if a curtain had finally been pulled aside. Gratitude is not a bill you pay once and forget, he said. Victoria's smile returned, thin and polished. That sounds noble, but noble does not run a household. No, Richard said. Character does. The kitchen door opened behind Annie before Victoria could reply. Mrs. Margaret Bell entered carrying a brown paper bag from the market. Her silver hair tucked beneath a wool hat. She stopped when she saw all three of them. Oh, she said, I can come back. Richard looked at her. Stay, Mrs. Bell. Mrs. Bell set the bag down slowly. Her eyes moved to Annie's tear-streaked face, then to Victoria's rigid smile, then to Richard. She had worked in enough houses to read a room before anyone explained it. Victoria's voice softened at once. Margaret, There's no need for concern. Annie became upset over a small correction. Mrs. Bell did not answer immediately. She took off her gloves finger by finger. A small correction? She asked. Victoria smiled. Yes, nothing more. Mrs. Bell looked at Annie. Is that so? Annie hesitated. I don't want to cause trouble, ma'am. That wasn't my question. Richard watched Annie breathe in, then out. She said my face looked like a black doormat, Annie said, and that the doormat belonged outside by the cattle barn. Mrs. Bell's face did not move much, but her eyes changed. Victoria gave a tired laugh. This is becoming theatrical. Mrs. Bell turned to her. Miss Langford, I have known many women who were tired, stressed, worried about weddings, worried about guests, worried about flowers. I have never known stress to put words like that in a decent person's mouth. Victoria's smile vanished. Richard said nothing. He let the older woman's words stand. Mrs. Bell picked up the market bag again and placed it on the counter. Annie, your mother raised you to be respectful. Respectful does not mean silent when someone steps on your dignity. Annie looked down, fighting tears. Victoria's voice grew colder. I don't believe the household staff should be taking sides. Mrs. Bell looked at her plainly. When one side is cruelty, I don't find the choice difficult. The room went quiet. Richard saw Victoria's mask crack wider. Her eyes were bright now. Angry not because she felt remorse, but because people she considered beneath her had been allowed to speak in front of him. This is exactly what I mean, Victoria said. There is no order anymore. Everyone feels entitled to an opinion. Richard answered, no, everyone is being treated like a person for once. Victoria turned on him. And what am I being treated like? Richard held her gaze. Like someone who needs to explain why she planned to make Annie look guilty before the wedding. Mrs. Bell's eyes moved sharply to Victoria. Annie whispered, planned? Victoria's face tightened. I did not plan anything. Richard nodded toward the phone on the island. You said you would make it look like she broke something or took something. Mrs. Bell inhaled softly. Annie did not move at all. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time that evening, she had no ready sentence. Richard looked at Annie. He saw the moment the truth struck her. Not just that Victoria disliked her, but that the woman had been preparing to ruin her if dislike was not enough. Annie's voice came out small. You were going to tell people I stole? Victoria recovered just enough to speak. I said I might need a reason to send you home. That is different. No, Richard said. It is not. Victoria turned back to him, anger breaking through now. You are letting sentiment blind you. Richard's voice dropped. And you are letting contempt expose you. Mrs. Bell moved closer to Annie, not touching her, but standing near enough to make it clear the girl was not alone. Victoria saw it. Her nostrils flared slightly. Fine, she said. You want honesty? Annie is not ready for this house. She is too sensitive, too clumsy, and too attached to a place that was never hers. Her mother had the good sense to know her position. The daughter does not. Annie flinched as if struck. Richard's face went still. Mrs. Bell murmured, Lord have mercy. Victoria seemed to hear herself, but instead of stopping, she lifted her chin. Richard looked at the woman he had planned to marry, and the last soft memory he had of her loosened its grip. Say one more word about Eleanor or her daughter being beneath this house, he said, and you will answer for all of it tonight. Victoria stared at him. Outside the kitchen windows, evening had darkened over the lawn. Inside, under the warm lights, there was nothing warm left in the room, and Annie, who had spent the day trying not to make trouble, finally understood that the trouble had never been her. Victoria stared at Richard as if she had not heard him correctly. For a woman who had built her life around being admired, being warned in a kitchen, in front of staff, was almost more than she could bear. Her face did not twist. She was too practiced for that. But her eyes hardened, and the hand resting on the marble island curled slowly into a fist. Mrs. Bell stayed near Annie. She did not say another word, but her presence changed the room. It gave Annie somewhere to stand that did not feel entirely alone. Victoria looked from Mrs. Bell to Annie, then back to Richard. So this is what we're doing now? The staff gathers, and I'm put on trial? Richard's voice stayed low. No one gathered. You were heard. I was upset. You were cruel. I was honest. The word came out before she could stop it. Richard's eyes narrowed. Honest? Victoria lifted her chin, and the last careful softness slipped further from her face. Yes, honest. This house has become confused. There are lines in homes like this for a reason. People work here, people live here, people visit here. Those things are not the same. Annie's hands tightened together. Mrs. Bell spoke quietly. Lines are not licenses to humiliate people. Victoria turned to her. Margaret, with respect, you have worked in fine homes long enough to know that familiarity creates problems. Mrs. Bell's eyebrows rose. I have worked in fine homes long enough to know that bad manners often wear pearls. The silence that followed was sharp. Victoria's face flushed. How dare you? Richard did not step in. Not yet. He watched Victoria the way he would watch a witness who had forgotten the question and begun confessing to something larger. Mrs. Bell did not raise her voice. I dare because I am old enough to have seen this before. A woman comes into a house, finds the people who kept it standing before she arrived, and thinks kindness to them makes her small. Victoria gave a tight laugh. This is ridiculous. No, Richard said. It is accurate. Victoria turned on him. You think I came into your life to fight with housekeepers? I think you came into my life pretending to be someone you are not. Her mouth parted. For a second, hurt appeared on her face. But Richard could no longer tell whether it was real or useful. I stood beside you, she said. When you were lonely, when you were tired, when those hospital board dinners bored you half to death, I was there. I made this house feel alive again. You decorated it, Richard said. That is not the same thing. The words struck harder than he expected. Victoria looked as if he had slapped her. But what rose in her was not sorrow. It was offense. I see, she said. So Eleanor is noble. Annie is innocent. Margaret is wise. And I am the villain because I said one unpleasant thing on a stressful day. Annie finally looked up. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough to reach everyone. It wasn't one thing. Victoria's eyes moved to her. Annie swallowed. But she did not look down this time. You said I leave fingerprints on glass I haven't touched. You said my mother was lucky Mr. Whitmore was sentimental. You told Clara not to let me serve in the front room because guests would wonder if the house was short-staffed. Victoria's face tightened. I never said that. Clara's voice came from the doorway. You did, ma'am. Everyone turned. The young maid stood just inside the kitchen entrance, with the linens still in her arms. She looked frightened, but she did not retreat. I'm sorry. Mrs. Bell asked me to bring these down. I heard my name. Victoria's expression shifted into a warning. Clara, be very careful. Clara held the linens tighter. I am being careful. That's why I didn't say anything before. Richard looked at her. Tell the truth. Clara glanced at Annie, then at Mrs. Bell. Miss Victoria said Annie shouldn't be in the front rooms during the engagement dinner. She said some guests noticed details and asked questions. I didn't know what she meant at first, but she stopped. But what? Richard asked. Clara's eyes dropped, but then she said Annie's face made the service look rough. Annie closed her eyes. Victoria snapped. That is not what I meant. Mrs. Bell said. You keep saying that after people repeat what you said. Richard looked at Victoria. How many people misunderstood you? Victoria's breathing changed. She was losing the room, and she knew it. The more she tried to regain control, the more her real contempt showed. You all want to turn this into something ugly, she said. Fine. I wanted the engagement dinner to be elegant. I wanted the house to reflect the life Richard and I are building. Is that a crime? No, Richard said, but deciding Annie's face harms that life is. Victoria pointed toward Annie, no longer pretending not to. She is always there, in the halls, near the rooms, listening, looking wounded, making people feel guilty for having standards. Annie's voice broke. I was working. You were hovering. I was doing what you asked. You were making yourself seen. Richard stepped forward. Enough. But Victoria kept going, the words rushing now that the dam had cracked. No, Richard, you need to hear this. You have let this house become emotional. Eleanor's illness, Annie's tears, Margaret's opinions. I am trying to build a proper home with you. And everywhere I turn, there is some reminder that I am supposed to bow to a woman who failed at a lunch counter and a daughter who thinks crying is a reference. Clara gasped softly. Anya vent pale. Mrs. Bell's face set into lines of anger Richard had never seen before. Richard did not speak at once. When he did, his voice was colder than the room. "Do not speak of Eleanor that way again." Victoria turned back to him, eyes bright. "Why?" "Because she once saved your watch?" "My father's watch," Richard said. "Yes, your father's watch." Victoria spread her hands. "And I am sorry, truly, that it means so much to you. But how long does one act of loyalty buy control over your life? How long does Annie get protected because her mother noticed mud on a floor 12 years ago?" Richard's face changed. The last hesitation left it. "You think loyalty is a transaction. I think loyalty has limits." "No," Richard said. "Your gratitude has limits. Mine does not." Victoria laughed without humor. "That sounds beautiful." "It will sound less beautiful when people ask why your fiancé left. And the answer is that you chose the maid's daughter over your future wife." Richard stepped closer, but his voice did not rise. "You were never my future wife, if this is who you are, when no one important is watching." Victoria stared at him. "No one important?" The phrase caught her before she could stop it. Richard looked toward Annie, Clara, and Mrs. Bell. Then he looked back at Victoria. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what you believed." Victoria said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked once, twice, too loud in the silence. Then Annie spoke, and everyone turned toward her. "I didn't want your place," she said to Victoria. "I didn't want anything from you. I only wanted to do my work until Mama got better." Victoria looked at her with open contempt now. "Then you should have done it without making yourself a tragedy." Annie flinched, but she did not step back. Richard moved between them fully. "You are done speaking to her." Victoria's lips parted. "No," Richard said before she could start. "You are done." He turned to Clara. "Put the linens down and go find Caleb. Ask him to wait near the front hall." Clara nodded quickly, set the linens on the counter, and left. Victoria's face sharpened. "Why do you need Caleb?" Richard looked at her. "Because this conversation is almost over." Mrs. Bell placed a steady hand on Annie's shoulder. Annie did not pull away. Victoria looked from one face to another, and for the first time that night, fear moved through her anger. "Richard," she said, changing her voice again, softer now, almost wounded. "Please, we're both upset. Let's go upstairs and talk privately." Richard did not move. "Privately," he said, "is where you do your best work." The words landed, and Victoria's expression went still. Richard looked at the woman he had planned to marry, the woman he had brought into his home, the woman he had trusted beside people who had earned more trust than she ever had. Then he looked at Annie, who stood with red eyes and a face she had been made to question. A decision formed in him, not sudden, but final. Outside the kitchen, Caleb's footsteps approached the hall. Victoria heard them too. "Richard," she whispered. He looked at her one last time and said, "Take off the ring." Victoria looked at Richard as if the words had arrived in a language she did not speak. "Take off the ring?" she repeated. Richard did not answer right away. He stood near the end of the kitchen island, his shoulders square, his face calm in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. Caleb's footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen. Clara was somewhere behind him in the hall, silent now. Mrs. Bell kept her hand on Annie's shoulder. Victoria gave a small laugh, but it broke in the middle. "You are not serious." "I am." "Richard, this is insane." "No," he said. "What is insane is that a young woman stood on my balcony wondering if her face was something people should wipe their shoes on, and you still think the problem is your embarrassment." Victoria's mouth tightened. "I said something harsh, I can admit that. But ending an engagement over one ugly sentence, it was not one sentence." She looked at him with irritation flashing through the fear. "You're letting them turn you against me." Richard glanced at Annie. She had not moved. Her eyes were on the floor, as if even now she was trying to take up less space. "They did not turn me against you," he said. "They let me hear you." Victoria's hand went to the ring. Not to remove it, but to cover it. The diamond caught the kitchen light, throwing a hard white glint across her fingers. "You gave me this," she said. "You asked me to build a life with you. I asked the woman I thought you were." Her face changed then. For the first time, the wounded act slipped into something raw and angry. "And now you think you know me because of a few comments in the kitchen? I know enough. You know nothing." Her voice rose. "You know what it is to be lonely and grateful. When someone attractive sits beside you at dinner, you know how to write checks, shake hands, and pretend your house has a soul because old employees remember your father's watch. But you do not know what it takes to become Mrs. Whitmore. I do. The room fell still. Richard's eyes did not leave her. Is that what this was about? Victoria breathed hard, then seemed to realize how much she had revealed. She looked at Mrs. Bell and Caleb near the doorway, then at Clara's shadow beyond them, then at Annie. Her voice dropped, but the contempt stayed. After the wedding, this house needed order. It had order. It had attachments. She pointed toward Annie without looking at her. Her mother. Her. The stories. The loyalty. The way everyone speaks of Eleanor. Like she is family. Mrs. Bell's hand tightened gently on Annie's shoulder. Victoria continued, I was supposed to come into this house as your wife, but everywhere I turned, there was some reminder that a servant had a place here before me. Richard let the word hang. A servant. Annie's face burned, but she did not look away from the floor. Richard said, Eleanor earned her place. And I didn't, Victoria snapped. You had one, he said. You just could not stand that someone beneath you had one too. Victoria looked at him with open disbelief. Beneath me? You're twisting my words. No, I am finally hearing them straight. Caleb stepped into the doorway then, broad-shouldered, older, with the steady posture of a man who had worn a uniform long before he wore a driver's jacket. Mr. Whitmore? Richard did not turn. Please stay there, Caleb. Yes, sir. Victoria looked at Caleb as if his presence insulted her. You called security on your fiancé? I asked a trusted man to stand nearby while I ended a mistake. She flinched, and for 1 second Richard saw something like grief cross her face. Then pride buried it. You will regret humiliating me like this. I regret not seeing Annie's humiliation sooner. That girl is not your responsibility. Richard stepped closer. Everyone under my roof is my responsibility. Victoria's jaw worked. Fine. Then be responsible. Send her home. Give her money. Let her cry to her mother. But do not throw away a marriage because she is sensitive. Annie finally lifted her head. I didn't ask him to do anything, she said. Victoria turned on her. You didn't have to. Girls like you learn early how to look helpless. The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Richard's voice cut through. Enough. Victoria's eyes flashed. No, Richard. Not enough. You want honesty? Here it is. I do not want her in my home. I do not want her mother's shadow in my marriage. I do not want staff who think kindness means equality. I do not want to walk through my own rooms and see people looking at me like I have to earn approval from the help. Mrs. Bell said quietly, You just did earn something. Victoria looked at her. Stay out of this. Richard held up a hand, not to silence Mrs. Bell, but to stop the room from breaking into pieces. He looked at Victoria's covered hand, the ring. She stared at him. Richard, take it off. Her breathing grew uneven. You would choose them over me? He answered without pause. I choose the truth over the lie I was about to marry. For a moment, no one moved. Then Victoria slowly pulled the diamond from her finger. Her hand shook, though whether from rage or shock, Richard could not tell. She placed the ring on the island. It made a small sound against the marble, much too small for the end of something that had occupied so much of his life. Richard looked at it, then at her. The wedding is off. Victoria's face went pale. Mrs. Bell closed her eyes for half a second, as if offering a silent prayer. Clara gave a tiny breath in the hallway. Caleb remained still. Annie looked stunned, not relieved, not yet. She seemed unable to believe that something so large could happen because of what had been done to her. Victoria pushed the ring farther across the island with 2 fingers. You are making the biggest mistake of your life. No, Richard said. I almost did. She grabbed her phone from the counter. My attorney will call yours. He should. My family will not take this quietly. I do not expect them to. You will be talked about. I have survived worse than gossip. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You think this makes you noble? No, it makes me late. That answer quieted her more than any insult could have. For a second, she had no place to put her anger. Richard turned to Caleb. Please arrange for Miss Langford's driver to be contacted. If he is not available, have one of our cars take her wherever she wishes to go tonight. Mrs. Bell, please have her personal items packed tomorrow morning and sent through her assistant. Nothing of hers needs to remain here. Victoria's mouth opened. You're throwing me out tonight? Richard met her eyes. You will not sleep under this roof again. The finality in his voice seemed to remove the air from the kitchen. Victoria looked toward the door, then back at him. She understood now that there would be no private conversation upstairs, no tearful repair, no quiet rewriting of the scene. He had heard her. Others had heard her. The mask could not be put back on in the same room where it had fallen. "You will be alone again," she said. Richard nodded once. Better alone than cruel by association. Her face twisted, but only briefly. She gathered herself, lifting her chin as if she were leaving by choice. She walked toward the doorway. Caleb stepped aside, professional and silent. At the threshold, Victoria turned and looked at Annie. For a moment, Annie tensed. Victoria said nothing. That was the first mercy she had offered all night, though it came only because there was nothing left to gain. Then she left. Her heels moved down the hall, sharp against the wood floor, fading toward the front of the house. A door opened. A low exchange followed. Then another door closed. The kitchen remained still. The ring sat on the island between the coffee cups, the folded linens, and the bag of groceries Mrs. Bell had brought in from the market. It looked suddenly small. Richard reached for it, then stopped. He did not want to touch it yet. Instead, he turned to Annie. She was crying again, but differently now. The tears did not come from the same place as before. They came from shock, from release, from fear that had lost its grip too quickly for the body to understand. "Annie," he said. She shook her head. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Richard felt the sentence in his chest. "You did not cause this. But if I hadn't said anything, if you had not said anything," he said, "I might have married someone who believed cruelty was acceptable as long as it happened out of sight." Mrs. Bell touched Annie's back. "Let the man tell the truth, child." Annie covered her mouth and tried to steady herself. Richard looked around the kitchen at the people who had witnessed the end of his engagement. Clara in the hall. Caleb near the door. Mrs. Bell beside Annie. Each of them had served this house in some way, quietly, faithfully, while he had mistaken silence for contentment. He took a breath. "Please ask everyone on staff to come to the main room," he said to Mrs. Bell. "Tonight." Mrs. Bell nodded. "Yes, sir." Annie looked up quickly. "Mr. Whitmore?" He looked at her, his voice gentler now. "This house needs to hear something from me, and so do you." Mrs. Bell did not ask what Richard intended to say. At her age, she had learned that when a man finally understood his own house, the first words needed to come from him, not from advice. She gave Annie's shoulder one last gentle touch, then turned toward the hall. "Clara, find Mr. Henson in the garden room. Tell him Mr. Whitmore wants everyone in the main room. Caleb, would you let the kitchen staff know?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The house began to move in quiet lines. Footsteps went down the corridor. A door opened near the pantry. Someone whispered. The sound traveled carefully, as if even the walls were unsure what had happened. Annie remained near the kitchen island. Her eyes moved to the ring Victoria had left behind, then quickly away. Richard noticed. "I'll have that put away," he said. Annie shook her head. "It's not my place to look at it. You are allowed to look at what changed your life tonight." She folded her hands. "I don't know if it changed my life, sir. I just know Miss Victoria is going to hate me forever." Richard looked toward the hallway where Victoria had disappeared. "That is her burden, not yours. It doesn't feel that way." "No," he said. "I suppose it wouldn't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken, coffee, and the faint sweetness of the cornbread Mrs. Bell had made that afternoon. Eleanor's cornbread was better, Richard thought suddenly. She made it in a cast-iron skillet, with the edges crisp, and the center soft enough to break apart under butter. Victoria had once called it too rustic. When Eleanor brought a pan out for a staff meal, Richard had smiled politely then and said nothing. He remembered that now, and felt another small failure add itself to the larger one. Annie saw the change in his face. "Sir?" Richard looked back at her. "I was thinking about your mother." Annie's expression softened with worry. "Please don't tell her everything tonight. She's been coughing more. If she gets upset, she won't sleep. I won't call her without you. But Annie, she should know you were wronged. She'll blame herself. For Victoria's cruelty? For leaving me here." Richard's voice lowered. "Then I will make sure she understands the fault belongs where it belongs." Annie gave a small nod, but it was the nod of someone agreeing to a thing she could not yet believe. Mrs. Bell returned to the doorway. "They're gathering, Mr. Whitmore. Everyone who's still on property." "Thank you." She glanced at Annie. You ready, child? Annie looked toward Richard, unsure. He answered before she could ask. You do not have to stand in front of anyone if you don't want to. If I don't go, Annie said, people will guess anyway. People will not be permitted to gossip about you. Mrs. Bell gave a dry little sound. That would be a first in a house this size. Richard looked at her. She lifted both hands. Forgive me, sir, but truth is still truth after supper. For the first time that night, the corner of Richard's mouth moved, though the feeling behind it was not humor. Then let's make sure they hear it from me. They walked from the kitchen to the main room, not through the front hall, but through the inner passage Eleanor had used for years. Richard slowed when they passed the sideboard where his father's watch had once been displayed during family gatherings. After the attempted theft, he had locked it away. He had thought he was protecting the watch. Now he wondered if he had locked away the memory of why it remained. In the main room, the staff stood in an uneven half-circle. Clara held her hands behind her back. Caleb stood near the door. Mr. Henson, the gardener, had dirt on his boots and a cap in his hands. 2 kitchen workers, a houseman who came 3 nights a week, and Mrs. Bell waited without looking directly at Annie. They all knew enough to be careful. Richard stood by the fireplace. Annie stayed beside Mrs. Bell, not hidden but not displayed either. Richard looked at the faces in front of him. Some had worked for him for years. Some only a few months. All of them had seen parts of his life. He had never shown the people he sat beside. At benefit dinners, they had carried trays after funerals, changed sheets after illness, put rooms back together after arguments, and learned to be invisible as a kind of job requirement. He had paid them. He had thanked them. He had believed that was respect. Tonight, he saw the gap. I asked you here because something happened in this house, he said, and because I should have made something clear long before tonight. No one moved. Miss Langford is no longer my fiancée. She has left this estate and will not return. A stir passed through the room, small but unmistakable. Clara looked down. Mr. Henson blinked hard. The kitchen workers glanced at each other and then away. Richard continued, "This is not a subject for gossip. It is not a story to be repeated in town, to neighbors, or to anyone who has no right to it. But the reason matters enough that you should hear this from me." Annie's breath caught. Richard did not look at her, not because he had forgotten her, but because he would not turn her pain into a spectacle. Annie was spoken to tonight in a way no person in this house should ever be spoken to. Her appearance, her work, her mother, and her dignity were mocked. I heard enough with my own ears to know the truth. He paused. I also heard plans to place blame on her for something she had not done. This time the room changed more sharply. Mrs. Bell's face tightened. Caleb's jaw moved once. Clara's eyes filled. Richard let the weight of it settle. From this day forward, no one in this house will be treated as less than human. Not because of their work. Not because of their skin. Not because of where they come from, how much money they have, or whether their name is on the deed. He looked at each person in turn. If anyone breaks that rule, they will leave the way Miss Langford left tonight. The room was silent. Then Mr. Henson, who rarely spoke inside the house unless asked, cleared his throat. "That's a good rule, sir." Mrs. Bell gave him a quick look. But Richard nodded. "It should have been spoken sooner." Clara's voice came from the side. "I'm sorry, Annie." Annie looked startled. Clara stepped forward half a pace. "I heard things before. Not all of it, but enough. I should have said something." Annie shook her head. "You were scared too." Clara pressed her lips together and nodded. Mrs. Bell turned toward the group. "Then we learn from tonight. Fear makes quiet rooms. It doesn't make clean ones." Richard looked at her. "Thank you, Margaret." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." He addressed them again. "You may return to your work, or go home if your shift is finished. Mrs. Bell will arrange pay for any extra time. Caleb, please make sure Miss Langford's departure is handled respectfully but firmly." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. People began to leave in silence. But it was not the same silence as before. It had a different shape. Less fearful. More aware. Clara touched Annie's arm lightly as she passed. "Mr. Henson gave her a small nod, the kind older men gave when words would embarrass both sides. Annie nodded back. Soon only Richard, Annie, and Mrs. Bell remained in the main room. The fire had burned low. Annie stood with her hands at her sides, looking overwhelmed. Richard walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Annie, I owe you more than a public statement." She shook her head at once. "No, sir. You already did too much," Mrs. Bell murmured. "Let him finish, child." Richard's face softened. "Your mother trusted me. Tonight, I failed that trust for longer than I care to admit. I cannot undo what was said to you, but I can make sure you do not have to carry it alone." Annie's eyes filled again. "I don't know what to do now." "You rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we talk about getting you home to your mother for a while." Her lips parted. "Home? To Mississippi. If that is what you want." Annie stared at him as if he had opened a door she had been too afraid to touch. "I can go see Mama?" "Yes," Richard said. "And you will go without worrying about wages, travel, medicine, or whether there is still a place for your family here." Mrs. Bell blinked and looked away, pretending to adjust her sleeve. Annie covered her mouth with both hands. For the first time that night, she was not wiping away shame. She was trying to hold in relief. Annie did not answer right away. She stood in the main room with both hands over her mouth, looking at Richard as though he had offered something too large to accept. The fire behind him had burned down to a low orange line. Outside, the windows reflected the room back at them, the high ceiling, the dark furniture, Mrs. Bell standing near the side table, and Annie in her work uniform, still carrying the weight of an evening that had changed too quickly. "Mississippi?" Annie said at last. "If you want to go," Richard said. "No one will force you." "I do want to go. She lowered her hands. "I don't know how to tell Mama why I'm coming." Mrs. Bell stepped closer, her voice gentle but practical. "You tell her you need to see her. Mothers understand that before they understand details." Annie tried to smile, but it faded. "She'll hear my voice and know something happened. Then let her know you're safe first," Richard said. "The rest can come slowly." Annie looked toward the doorway. The house had gone quiet again, but the quiet was not empty. It held the echo of Victoria's heels leaving, the staff gathering, the rule Richard had spoken aloud. It also held the fear that tomorrow might find a way to undo tonight. "What about Miss Victoria?" Annie asked. "What if she calls people? What if she says I made it up?" Richard took a breath. "She may try." Annie's shoulders tightened. "But she will not be allowed to harm you," he continued. "Caleb heard enough. Mrs. Bell heard enough. Clara heard enough. I heard enough. And Victoria knows it." Mrs. Bell nodded. "A lie travels fast, but it limps when too many people saw the truth leave the room first." Richard glanced at her. She gave a small shrug. "My mother used to say that." Annie let out a breath that was almost a laugh, then wiped her cheek with her fingers. "My mama says people with clean hands don't mind showing them." "She is right," Mrs. Bell said. Richard walked to the sideboard where a notepad and pen sat near the telephone. "Then we'll show ours properly." He wrote slowly, the way he did when a matter needed to become official. Annie watched but did not ask. Mrs. Bell understood before he finished. "You're documenting it," she said. "Yes, not for gossip, for protection." Annie's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't want police or anything like that." "This is not that," Richard said. "It is a written record of why Miss Langford was removed from the estate, and why she is not to contact you, your mother, or any member of this staff." Mrs. Bell gave an approving nod. "Good." Richard tore the page neatly from the pad. "Tomorrow my attorney will prepare a formal notice. Tonight, Caleb will be instructed that Victoria is not permitted back on the property without my written approval. If anyone calls asking about you, no one gives information. Not your travel plans, not your mother's address, not a word." Annie looked down. "I didn't know rich people had to be told not to hurt folks," Mrs. Bell murmured. "Some rich people need telling more than most." Richard accepted the rebuke without defending himself. Too many things in this house were assumed. That ends now. He folded the note and set it aside. "Would you like to call your mother tonight?" Annie looked uncertain. She might be asleep. "What time is it in Mississippi?" Mrs. Bell asked. "The same," Annie said, "but Mama goes to bed early when her cough is bad." Richard looked at the clock. It was just after 8:30. Annie touched the small silver cross at her neck. "Maybe I should wait until morning. If she hears me crying, she'll try to come back. She'll say she's fine even if she's not." "Then we wait," Richard said. But you should not sleep in the service room tonight if it makes you uncomfortable. Annie looked startled. Where else would I sleep? Mrs. Bell answered before Richard could. The blue guest room hasn't been used since July. Annie shook her head. No, ma'am. I can't sleep in a guest room. Why not? Mrs. Bell asked. Because I clean those rooms. And tonight one can hold you while you rest. Annie looked helplessly at Richard. He spoke with care. The blue room is available. You may use it, or you may stay in your own room. The choice is yours. That word seemed to matter. Choice. Annie looked toward the stairs. I think I'd rather stay in my room. My mama's quilt is there. Mrs. Bell's expression softened. Then I'll make tea and bring it down. Chamomile, if Clara hasn't used the last of it. I don't want to trouble you. Mrs. Bell clicked her tongue. Child, I have been troubled by better people than you, and worse reasons than tea. Annie smiled a little despite herself. Richard felt the room ease by one small degree. Caleb appeared at the doorway. He removed his cap, though he was inside and had no need to. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Langford has left the property. Her driver came. I watched the car pass the gate. Richard nodded. Thank you. She asked if she could return tomorrow with her assistant. No. Her assistant may coordinate with Mrs. Bell and my attorney. Victoria is not to enter the grounds. Yes, sir. Caleb's eyes moved to Annie briefly. Not with pity, which Annie might have hated, but with a quiet kind of respect. Miss Annie, if anybody bothers you on the way to Mississippi, you call the house. I'll come get you myself. Annie blinked. Thank you, Mr. Caleb. He nodded once. Your mama always made sure I got coffee before winter drives. Least I can do. After he left, Annie turned her face away, overcome again by kindness arriving from places she had not expected. Richard picked up the ring from the kitchen earlier, only after Mrs. Bell brought it in wrapped in a napkin. He placed it in a small drawer of the sideboard without looking at it long. That should have meant something better, Annie said quietly. Richard closed the drawer. It meant what I failed to examine. She looked at him, unsure. I wanted peace, he said. Victoria looked like peace from a distance. Mrs. Bell said, from a distance, even a locked gate can look like welcome. Richard looked toward the hallway where Victoria had left. I should have seen it sooner. Annie shook her head. She was different around you. That explains how I missed it. It does not excuse that I did. Annie did not know what to do with a man like Richard apologizing twice in one night. Men with his kind of money usually explained themselves. They did not stand in their own living room and admit fault in front of people who worked for them. Mrs. Bell broke the silence with mercy. Annie, go wash your face. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because tears dry tight on the skin. I'll bring tea in 10 minutes. Annie nodded. She took a few steps, then stopped and turned back to Richard. Sir? Yes? When I go home, will Mama still have a job? Richard answered at once. If she wants it, and if she does not, she will still have my support. Annie's lips parted. Why? Because she earned more than wages here. Annie looked down, then back up. She always said you were a fair man. Richard felt the words more sharply than praise should have landed. Tonight I became a little closer to one. Annie held his gaze for a second, then nodded. She went toward the service hall, not rushing this time. Mrs. Bell watched her leave. She'll cry once she's alone. I know. Let her. Some tears are poison leaving. Richard stood by the fireplace and looked at the room Victoria had wanted to claim. It had heavy curtains, old books, family photographs, and furniture chosen long before she knew his name. Yet for months, he had allowed her taste to cover parts of it, replacing lived-in things with pale flowers, bright fabrics, and arrangements no one dared touch. Margaret, he said, using Mrs. Bell's first name for the first time that night, I need you to tell me something honestly. She folded her hands. I'll try. How much did I miss? Mrs. Bell's eyes lowered, not out of fear, but sadness. Enough. He nodded slowly. She was careful, Mrs. Bell said. Always careful around you, but careful cruelty still leaves marks. Richard looked at the dark window, where his reflection stared back older than it had that morning. Tomorrow, he said, we begin fixing what can be fixed. Mrs. Bell adjusted her sleeves. Then start with the girl and her mother. Houses can wait. Richard turned toward the service hall where Annie had gone. For the first time all evening, he understood that the estate had not become quiet after Victoria left because the trouble was over. It had become quiet because truth had finally entered. And truth, unlike cruelty, did not need to shout. Annie did cry once she was alone. She made it as far as the small room behind the laundry hall before her knees weakened. She closed the door, leaned her back against it, and covered her mouth so no one would hear. The room was narrow, with one twin bed, one dresser, a lamp with a crooked shade, and the faded quilt her mother had folded across the foot of the mattress before leaving for Mississippi. Annie crossed the room and pressed her face into that quilt. It smelled faintly of lavender soap and home. For a while, she did not think. She only breathed through the pain of the day. Victoria's words still moved through her mind. But they no longer stood alone. Richard's voice stood beside them now, Mrs. Bell's hand on her shoulder. Clara's apology, Caleb saying he would come get her if anyone bothered her. None of it erased the hurt, but it kept the hurt from becoming the only truth. A soft knock came at the door. "Annie?" Mrs. Bell called. "It's me." Annie sat up quickly and wiped her face. "Come in, ma'am." Mrs. Bell entered with a mug of tea, a folded napkin, and a look that said she knew exactly how much crying had been done and would not mention it unless needed. She set the mug on the dresser. "Chamomile with honey." "Not too much." "Your mama always said too much honey makes a person lazy." Annie gave a weak smile. "She says that about sugar too. She says that about anything sweet because she thinks discipline should survive dessert." Mrs. Bell sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one hand on her knee. "How's your breathing?" "It's better." "Good. Drink while it's warm." Annie took the mug with both hands. The heat steadied her fingers. For a moment, they sat in the kind of silence older women knew how to make safe. Then Annie said, "Do you think Mama will be ashamed?" Mrs. Bell looked at her. "Of you? Of all this? Of me crying in front of Mr. Whitmore? Of people knowing? Your mother will be angry someone hurt you. She will not be ashamed of you. She told me to keep my head down. She also told you your dignity wasn't for sale. I heard her say it more than once." Annie looked into the tea. "It didn't feel like dignity today." "No, it felt like being cornered." Annie nodded, and her face folded again, though she held the tears back this time. Mrs. Bell leaned closer. "Listen to me. There is a difference between humility and letting someone grind you into the floor. Some people confuse the two because it benefits them." Annie looked up. "Miss Victoria wanted you quiet because quiet made her comfortable," Mrs. Bell said. "That is not the same as peace." The words settled over Annie slowly. Downstairs, a door closed, a cupboard opened. The estate was returning to its evening rhythm, but it would never return to the rhythm it had that morning. Annie could feel that, and it frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, Mr. Whitmore speaks to his attorney. Caleb will handle the gate. Clara and I will pack Miss Langford's things. You will call your mother when you are ready, and if the good Lord allows it, you will eat a proper breakfast. I don't know if I can. You can start with toast." Annie smiled despite herself. Mrs. Bell patted her hand, then stood. "Try to sleep. If you need me, knock on my door. I don't sleep deep anymore. My knees make sure of that." "Thank you, Mrs. Bell." The older woman paused at the door. "Child, you do not have to thank people every time they treat you decently." Annie held the mug tighter. After Mrs. Bell left, Annie sat on the bed until the tea cooled. She looked at the small photograph tucked into the mirror frame. Her and Eleanor outside Carter's kitchen on opening week. Eleanor wore a blue apron and stood in front of the window with her arm around Annie. The sign above them had been hand-painted, the letters uneven but proud. Carter's kitchen had failed before the year ended. Annie remembered her mother crying in the truck the day they took the sign down. Not loudly. Eleanor never cried loudly. She sat behind the steering wheel, hands in her lap, and said, "A dream can fail, and still have been worth trying." Annie had not understood then. Now she wondered how many dreams her mother had buried quietly so Annie could keep growing. Across the estate, Richard had not gone upstairs either. He sat in his study with the desk lamp on and Victoria's ring inside the top drawer. He had placed it there because leaving it on the kitchen island felt indecent, but the drawer seemed to pulse with the fact of it. His attorney, Paul Reeves, answered on the third ring. "Richard," Paul said, voice thick with sleep or bourbon. "This had better be expensive. It is personnel. That usually costs more." Richard did not smile. "The engagement is over." A pause. "With Victoria?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Do I ask why tonight, or do I wait until morning?" "You ask enough to protect the people in my house." Paul's tone changed. "What happened?" Richard told him only what was needed. He did not embellish. He did not soften. He said Victoria had verbally abused Annie, insulted Eleanor, been overheard discussing ways to blame Annie for damage or theft, and had been removed from the property. Staff members had witnessed enough of the exchange to confirm the pattern. Paul was quiet when Richard finished. Is Annie a minor? No. Employee? Temporary household employee? Daughter of Eleanor Carter. The Eleanor Carter? Yes. Paul exhaled. I remember that theft case. She saved you a disaster. She did. And Victoria threatened to frame her daughter? She discussed making it look that way. That is enough for a formal no-contact instruction and property access restriction. I'll draft something first thing. In the meantime, document every witness while memories are fresh. Names, times, exact phrases where possible. Do not let Victoria retrieve belongings herself. I already told Caleb she is not to enter. Good. And Richard? Yes? Do not take her calls tonight. Richard looked at the phone in his hand. I do not intend to. She will call. Then she will cry. Then she will threaten. Then she will call someone who threatens better. Let counsel handle it. Richard leaned back in his chair. I nearly married her. Paul did not joke. Then be grateful you heard her before the vows. After the call ended, Richard sat alone. The study was the same room Eleanor had protected years earlier. The walnut shelves still held locked cabinets. The safe still sat behind the panel. His father's watch was inside. He had once believed those were the things that needed guarding. Tonight he understood how limited that belief had been. He opened a drawer and took out a sheet of stationery. At the top, he wrote the date and time. Then he wrote the names of everyone present. Annie Carter, Victoria Langford, Margaret Bell, Clara Jennings, Caleb Moore, and himself. He wrote what he had heard on the stairwell. He wrote what Clara confirmed. He wrote Victoria's exact words as closely as memory allowed. The act was not emotional, but it felt necessary. A record. A line. A way of saying that Annie's pain would not be left floating in the air for someone richer to deny tomorrow. Near 10 o'clock, the house phone rang. Richard looked at it. It rang again. Then his private cell lit up with Victoria's name. He watched it until it went dark. A moment later, a message appeared. We need to talk. You are overreacting. Richard did not answer. Another came. My mother is asking questions. Do not embarrass me. Then another. That girl is going to ruin everything if you let her. Richard read the last line twice. Not because it surprised him, but because it told him Victoria still did not understand. Annie had not ruined anything. She had revealed what was already rotten. He turned the phone face down. In the service room, Annie finally lay down beneath her mother's quilt. She did not sleep at once. She listened to the old pipes, the wind near the window, the distant footsteps of people closing the house for the night. Her face still hurt from crying, and her heart still carried the bruise of Victoria's words. But before sleep came, Annie reached for the photograph of Carter's kitchen and held it against her chest. Mama, she whispered into the dark, I'm coming home. Down the hall, Mrs. Bell turned off the kitchen lights one by one. Caleb checked the gate twice. Clara folded the dining linens with red eyes and steady hands. And in his study, Richard wrote one final sentence beneath the record of the evening. A house is not safe because it has locks. It is safe because cruelty is not allowed to stay. Morning came with a thin gray light over the estate. Annie woke before the alarm on the small table beside her bed. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was in the story of her own life. She heard the pipes in the wall, the wind moving along the narrow window, the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Then she saw her mother's quilt pulled up to her chest and the photograph of Carter's kitchen beside her pillow, and everything returned. Victoria's voice, Richard's face, the ring on the kitchen island, the staff standing in the main room, the words Richard had spoken so everyone could hear. No one in this house will be treated as less than human. Annie lay still and let that sentence settle again. It did not make her cheerful. Nothing about the morning felt cheerful, but it gave her enough strength to sit up. She washed her face at the small sink near the laundry room. The mirror above it was old, with a dark line at one corner where the glass had begun to silver. She looked at herself for longer than usual. Her eyes were swollen from crying. There was still a faint shadow where oil had smudged her cheek the day before, though she had scrubbed it twice. For a second, Victoria's words tried to come back. Annie reached for a clean towel, pressed it gently to her face, and whispered. No, it was not loud. It was not brave in the way people in movies were brave. but it was hers. When she entered the kitchen, Mrs. Bell was already at the stove, wearing her blue cardigan and stirring oatmeal in a small pot. Clara sat at the table with a mug of coffee, looking as if she had not slept well either. Mrs. Bell turned. There she is. Sit down before you decide work is more important than breakfast. Annie paused in the doorway. I can help. You can help by sitting. Clara pushed out the chair beside her. Please. If you don't sit, Mrs. Bell will start quoting her mother. And none of us are strong enough for that this early. Mrs. Bell gave Clara a look over her shoulder. My mother raised 8 children and buried 2 husbands. Her quotes have earned their place. Annie sat, and despite everything, a small smile came. Mrs. Bell placed a bowl in front of her, then added a spoonful of brown sugar and a little milk. Eat what you can. Clara looked down at her coffee. Annie, about last night. You already said sorry. I know. I just keep thinking of all the times I heard things and pretended I didn't. Annie held the spoon but did not eat yet. You were scared. That doesn't make it right. No, Mrs. Bell said, setting another bowl down. But guilt is only useful if it changes what you do next. Clara nodded. It will. Before Annie could answer, Caleb appeared at the kitchen door with his cap in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. Morning, he said. Mrs. Bell looked at him. You eat? Coffee in the garage. That is not eating. It is when you're 53 and in a hurry. Mrs. Bell made a sound of disapproval but let him live. Caleb looked at Annie. Gate's been quiet. Miss Langford's assistant called at 7. Mr. Whitmore told me to direct all calls to his attorney. Annie's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She called already? Her assistant did. Polite voice. Hard questions. Caleb folded the newspaper and tucked it under his arm. Don't worry. She got no answers. Mrs. Bell said. People who are used to doors opening for them get confused when one stays shut. Annie looked toward the hall. Is Mr. Whitmore awake? Been awake, Caleb said. Study light was on before dawn. Richard had not slept much. He had tried, briefly, then given up when the same images kept returning. Annie wiping her face with her sleeve. Victoria saying that people believed certain stories about girls like her. Eleanor standing in his study with stolen keys wrapped in a towel. By 6:30, he was at his desk with Paul Reeves on the phone. By 7, he had sent written instructions to the gatehouse, the household office, and his attorney. By 8, he had a printed statement in front of him. Not for the public, but for record. Victoria Langford was no longer permitted on Whitmore property. No staff member was to discuss Annie Carter or Eleanor Carter with outside callers. All property transfer would be handled through counsel. At 8:15, his private phone rang again. Victoria. He watched it light up. This time, instead of letting it die, he answered and said only, Paul Reeves is handling all communication. Victoria's voice came fast. Richard, don't you dare hide behind an attorney. I am not hiding. I am setting boundaries. Boundaries? She laughed bitterly. You embarrassed me in front of servants. I ended an engagement in front of witnesses. You have no idea what my family is saying. I do not care what your family is saying. There was a small silence. Then her voice softened, as if she had decided to try a different door. I was upset. I said things badly. You know me better than this. Richard looked at the paper on his desk, at the line where he had written Annie's exact words. No, he said. I know you better now. Victoria's breath caught. You're going to regret treating me like some disposable woman. I treated you like a woman responsible for her words. She is staff, Richard. And there it is again. Victoria went quiet. Richard said, Do not contact Annie. Do not contact Eleanor. Do not contact my staff. If you need your belongings, your assistant will coordinate with Mrs. Bell and Mr. Reeves. You're choosing them. I am choosing not to make a home with contempt. Her voice sharpened. You think the world will applaud you for this? They will say you lost your mind over a maid. Let them say what they need to. I know what I heard. He ended the call before she could answer. For a long moment, he sat with the phone in his hand. He did not feel triumphant. He felt tired, older, and clearer than he had the day before. A knock came at the study door. Come in. Mrs. Bell entered with a tray. Black coffee, toast, eggs he knew he would barely touch. You need food, she said. I need Annie to call her mother. She's eating now. A little. Good. Mrs. Bell set the tray on the desk and noticed the papers. Will there be trouble? Likely. From Miss Langford? From her family, her friends, possibly the press if she wants sympathy. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. And Annie? Will not be exposed to any of it if I can help it. Mrs. Bell studied him. You can help more than most men. Richard accepted that without pride. I should have helped sooner. Yes, she said. He looked up. Mrs. Bell did not soften the truth. But sooner is gone. Today is still here. Richard nodded slowly. Please ask Annie to come in when she is ready. Not as an employee. I want to discuss her travel and her mother's care. I'll tell her. As Mrs. Bell turned to leave, Richard opened the top drawer and took out a small wooden box. It had sat there for years, moved twice from one desk to another but never thrown away. Mrs. Bell saw it and paused. Is that what I think it is? Richard opened the lid. Inside lay Eleanor's old staff badge from the year after the theft, when he had made her household supervisor. The brass had dulled with time, but her name was still clear. Eleanor Carter. I kept it, he said. She thought she lost that. She left it behind when the restaurant opened. I meant to return it. Then the business failed, and I thought giving it back might hurt her pride. Mrs. Bell looked at the badge. Pride is a tender thing when life has already bruised it. I want Annie to take it to her. Not today, Mrs. Bell said. Richard looked at her. Today the girl needs rest and her mother's voice. Save the badge for when it can feel like honor, not sorrow. Richard closed the box. You're right. I try to be, when people listen. She left before he could respond. In the kitchen, Annie had managed half the oatmeal when Mrs. Bell returned. Mr. Whitmore would like to see you when you're ready, she said. Annie stood too fast. Now? When you're ready, Mrs. Bell repeated. Those words mean something. Annie sat back down, took one more bite because Mrs. Bell was watching, then folded her napkin. Clara touched her arm. You want me to walk with you? Annie thought about it, then shook her head. No. I think I can go. The walk to Richard's study felt longer than usual. She had been in that room only a few times, mostly to deliver coffee or collect a tray. Her mother used to tell her not to stare at the shelves, not to touch anything, not to let curiosity make her careless. This time, when she knocked, Richard opened the door himself. Good morning, Annie. Good morning, sir. Come in. Please sit. She stepped inside and sat at the chair across from his desk, stiff-backed, hands folded. Richard did not sit behind the desk. He took the chair to the side, so there would be no wide slab of mahogany between them. I spoke to my attorney this morning, he said. Victoria is not permitted to contact you or your mother. She is not permitted on the property. If anyone connected to her reaches out to you, you tell me or Mrs. Bell immediately. Annie nodded. I also want to arrange your trip home. Plane, train, or car, whichever you prefer. Bus is fine, she said quickly. It's cheaper. Richard shook his head. This is not about cheapest. I don't want to waste your money. Annie, after what happened in this house, comfort is not waste. She looked down at her hands. He continued, I will cover your wages while you are away. Your mother's medical costs as well. If she needs a specialist, we will find one. If she needs time, she will have it. If she decides she cannot return to work, she will not be abandoned. Annie's eyes filled, but she blinked hard. She won't want charity. Then we will not call it charity. We will call it what it is, a debt of honor long overdue. Annie looked at him, and something in her expression loosened. Can I call her now? She asked. Richard reached for the phone on the desk and turned it toward her. Of course. Annie's fingers trembled as she dialed the Mississippi number from memory. It rang 4 times. Then Eleanor's voice came through, tired but warm. Hello? Annie closed her eyes. Mama, she said, and the word broke in half before she could hold it together. Mama, Annie said again, but the second time it came out smaller. On the other end of the line, Eleanor Carter went quiet, not confused. A mother did not need a full sentence to hear pain in her child's voice. Annie, she said. Baby? What happened? Annie looked across the study at Richard. He had turned his chair slightly away, giving her privacy without leaving her alone. His hands were folded, his face lowered, but she knew he was listening for the part where he might need to help. I'm all right, Annie said quickly. Eleanor did not accept it. Don't start with that. I asked what happened. Annie pressed the phone closer to her ear. The sound of Mississippi came through faintly behind her mother's voice. A screen door creaking, someone moving a chair, the low call of a bird outside. That sound nearly broke her. It belonged to a world where people sat on porches, where neighbors brought soup without asking for a receipt, where her mother could rest beneath old trees instead of worrying about polished floors and wealthy people's moods. "Mama," Annie said, "can I come home for a little while?" Eleanor's breathing changed. "Are you hurt?" "No, not like that." "Did you get sick?" "No, Mom." "Did somebody put hands on you?" "No." Annie closed her eyes. "Nobody touched me." That was true, but not the whole truth. Words could still leave fingerprints where no one else could see. Eleanor was silent a moment. "Put Mr. Whitmore on the phone." Annie opened her eyes. "Mama," Annie Mae Carter. "Put that man on the phone." Richard looked up at the full name. Annie gave him an embarrassed, tearful look and held out the receiver. "She wants to speak to you." Richard stood and took the phone with both hands, as though it were something fragile. "Eleanor." "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor said. Her voice was respectful, but there was iron under it. "Tell me what happened to my child." Richard looked at Annie. She was staring at her lap, twisting the hem of her sleeve. He did not soften the truth into something useless. Victoria Langford spoke to Annie with cruelty. She insulted her face, her work, and her place in this home. I heard enough myself to know it was not a misunderstanding. Others heard it as well. Victoria also spoke of trying to make Annie appear responsible for damage or theft in order to remove her from the house. There was no sound from Eleanor for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "She did what?" "I ended the engagement. Victoria left the estate last night. She is not permitted to return or contact Annie. My attorney is preparing formal instructions today." Eleanor let out a breath that trembled despite her effort to hold it steady. "Where is Annie now?" "In my study." "Safe. Was she alone when it happened?" Richard swallowed. "At first, yes." That answer mattered. Eleanor heard it. "At first," she repeated. "I failed to see what was happening sooner," Richard said. "I am sorry." Annie looked up. She had never heard him sound like that on a business call, not even once. Eleanor did not rush to forgive him. She was too honest for that. "I left her there because I trusted your house," she said. "I know. And because I trusted you." "I know that too." A long pause followed. Then Eleanor coughed, turning away from the phone. The sound was deep and tiring. Annie's face changed instantly. She reached for the receiver, but Richard lifted a hand, gently, asking for one moment. "Eleanor," he said. "Annie wants to come home. I would like to send her today or tomorrow. Whichever is best for you. I will cover the travel, her wages while she is away, and your medical expenses. If you need care beyond what you're receiving, I will arrange it. I don't want charity, Mr. Whitmore. I am not offering charity. What do you call it then?" "A debt of honor." Eleanor was quiet. Richard continued. "Years ago, you protected what mattered to me. Last night, I did not protect what mattered to you soon enough. Let me do what I should have done from the beginning." Annie saw tears gather in his eyes, though he did not let them fall. Eleanor's voice softened, but only slightly. "You always were better at paying bills than accepting blame." Richard almost smiled. "That may be true, but you are accepting it now?" "Yes." "Then send my baby home." Annie pressed her hand to her mouth. Richard nodded, though Eleanor could not see it. "I will." "And Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes?" "Don't let that woman near her again." "I won't." Richard handed the phone back to Annie. "Mama?" "Oh, baby," Eleanor said, and the strength in her voice cracked at last. "Why didn't you tell me she was treating you bad?" Annie bent forward over the phone. "You were sick. I didn't want you to worry. I am your mother. Worrying is part of the job. I know." "No, you don't. Not yet." Eleanor coughed again, then steadied herself. "Listen to me. You did not shame me. You hear?" Annie's tears fell freely now. "Yes, ma'am. You did not shame me by crying. You did not shame me by speaking. You did not shame me because some woman with a cold heart forgot how to talk to another human being." Annie nodded, though her mother could not see. "She said my face looked like a doormat," Annie whispered. Eleanor's breath caught. When she spoke again, the pain in her voice was deep enough to sound old. "Your face is the face I prayed over the first night they put you in my arms. Your face is the face I washed before school, kissed before church, and looked for every time you came running through a door. Don't you let a woman who never loved you tell you what your face is worth." Annie broke then. Not loudly. She simply folded around the phone and cried. Richard turned fully away this time, giving her the dignity of not being watched. Eleanor waited. She did not hush her. She let her cry, the way mothers sometimes do when a child has held pain too long. After a while, Annie wiped her nose with the tissue Richard quietly placed on the desk near her hand. "I'm coming home," Annie said. "I'll be on the porch when you get here. You're supposed to be resting." "I can rest on the porch." Annie gave a weak laugh through her tears. "Mr. Whitmore said he'll help with your medicine." Eleanor sighed. "We'll talk about that." "Mama, I said we'll talk, didn't I? That means I might say yes after I make sure my pride gets a chair in the room." Annie smiled for real this time. When the call ended, she held the receiver a moment longer before placing it down. Richard turned back. "How is she?" "Angry," Annie said. "Tired, trying not to sound scared." "That sounds like Eleanor. She said I can come home. Then we'll make the arrangements." Annie nodded, then looked around the study. The walnut shelves, the desk, the locked cabinet where Richard kept things important enough to protect. Her eyes rested on the place behind the shelves where she knew the safe was hidden. Her mother had once saved this room from thieves. Last night, Richard had saved her from being made into one. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Did Miss Victoria really plan to say I stole?" Richard's face grew serious. "She said enough for me to believe she was willing to." Annie took that in slowly. "People might have believed her." "Yes," he said. "Some people might have. Because of how I look?" Richard did not answer quickly. He would not insult her with a lie. "Because some people are too ready to believe the worst about those with the least power," he said. "And because prejudice often looks for a story to hide behind." Annie looked down at her hands. "Mama always said a good name is all some folks have." "She's right. What happens to mine?" Richard leaned forward. "We protect it." "How?" "With records, with witnesses, with the truth spoken plainly. And by making sure you never have to stand alone against a lie that was built before you entered the room." Annie nodded, but he saw how tired she was. The night had taken more from her than sleep could repair in one morning. He stood. "You should rest for the remainder of the day. Mrs. Bell will help you pack only what you want to bring. The rest can follow later." "I can finish the laundry first." "No." She blinked. Richard's voice softened. "That was not a request. The laundry can wait. Your mother cannot." Annie's chin trembled again, but this time she managed to hold steady. "Thank you," she said. He hesitated, then opened the side drawer and took out the small wooden box Mrs. Bell had warned him about. He did not hand it to Annie yet. He only set it on the desk between them. "This belonged to your mother," he said. "I was going to give it to you today, but Mrs. Bell advised me to wait until it felt like honor instead of sorrow." Annie looked at the box. "What is it?" "Her old household supervisor badge, from after the theft." Annie touched the lid lightly but did not open it. "Mama thought she lost that. I kept it safe. She'll cry." "I know." Annie smiled a little. "She'll pretend she isn't." "I know that too." Richard closed his hand over the box gently. "When you leave, take it with you. Not as payment. As proof that your mother's name has never been small in this house." Annie looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for the first time since he had found her on the balcony, her eyes held something stronger than hurt. "Can I tell her you said that?" "Yes," Richard said. "Please do." A knock sounded at the study door. Mrs. Bell opened it halfway. "Travel options," she said. "There's an afternoon flight to Jackson, or an overnight train if Annie prefers not to fly." Annie looked at Richard, then at Mrs. Bell. "The train," she said softly. "Mama always liked trains. She says you can think better when the world goes by slow." Mrs. Bell smiled. "Then the train it is." Richard nodded. "Book a private roomette." Annie started to protest. He raised one hand. "Comfort is not waste." She closed her mouth, remembering the words from earlier. Mrs. Bell looked pleased. "Good. She's learning." Richard stood by the desk as Annie rose. Before she left, she turned back. "Sir?" "Yes?" "Last night, when I asked if my face looked like that, I think part of me was afraid you'd hesitate." Richard felt the weight of that honesty. "I'm sorry the world gave you reason to fear that." Annie nodded once. Then she followed Mrs. Bell out, walking slower than usual, not because she was weak, but because for the first time in that house, she was not trying to rush herself out of sight. Mrs. Bell did not take Annie straight back to the service hall. She led her first to the kitchen, where Clara had already cleared the breakfast bowls and laid a clean towel across the table. The room looked ordinary again in the morning light, and that almost made Annie uneasy. Only a few hours earlier, Victoria had stood near the marble island with Richard's ring on her finger, and contempt in her voice. Now the island held a pitcher of water, a basket of apples, and Mrs. Bell's notebook open to a list written in careful script. "Sit," Mrs. Bell said. Annie obeyed before she remembered she was no longer being ordered around the same way. Clara looked up from the table. "Train leaves at 4:20. Mrs. Bell called the station. Mr. Whitmore's office is handling the ticket." Annie blinked. "Already?" Mrs. Bell tapped the notebook. "When a woman decides to send a girl home to her mother, she does not hold a committee meeting," Clara added. "Private roomette, like Mr. Whitmore said. It connects through Memphis. Then Jackson. Caleb will drive you to the station." Annie looked from one woman to the other. "I don't need all that." Mrs. Bell gave her the look Eleanor used to give when Annie tried to argue with medicine. "Need and deserve are not always the same word, child." Annie lowered her eyes. "I just don't want anyone thinking I'm taking advantage." Clara's face softened. "Of what? A safe ride home?" Annie did not answer. The fear was old and familiar. Take too much, and people called you greedy. Say too little, and people walked over you. Annie had spent most of her life trying to stand in the narrow space between those two accusations. Mrs. Bell seemed to understand. She closed the notebook halfway. "Let me tell you something. Some people will call you ungrateful if you refuse help, and they'll call you selfish if you accept it. That means their opinion was never about you in the first place." Annie looked up. "Your mother worked here more than 12 years, Mrs. Bell continued. She missed holidays, birthdays, church suppers, and Lord knows how many nights of proper sleep. She protected this house when danger came through the back door. If this house can send you home in comfort while she is sick, then it should." Clara nodded. "And if anybody says different, they can fold their own linens." A small laugh slipped out of Annie before she could stop it. Mrs. Bell smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now, we pack." The word made Annie's stomach tighten. Her room was small, so packing should have been easy. It was not. Every item seemed to ask whether she was leaving for a visit or leaving a life behind. She folded 2 uniforms, then unfolded one because she did not want her mother to see too much of the house in her suitcase. She packed her church dress, a blue cardigan, socks, underclothes, the photograph from Carter's kitchen, and the small Bible Eleanor had given her when she was 14. Mrs. Bell stood by the dresser, sorting what should stay. "You want the quilt?" Annie touched it. "Yes, but it's heavy. Then it goes in the car, not the suitcase. Caleb will manage." Annie nodded. Clara entered with a paper bag. Mrs. Bell made sandwiches. "Turkey for the train, peanut butter in case you get nervous and don't want real food." "I'm not a child," Annie said, then immediately worried the words sounded rude. Clara only smiled. "I'm 26 and still want peanut butter when I'm upset," Mrs. Bell said from the dresser. "Food is not an age issue. It is a survival issue." Annie sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. "Mama's going to ask if I cried." "Tell her yes," Mrs. Bell said. "She doesn't like when I cry." "No. She doesn't like when life gives you reason to." That made Annie quiet. A knock came at the open door. Richard stood in the hall, not entering until Annie looked up. "May I?" "Yes, sir." He stepped inside with the small wooden box in his hands. In the narrow room, he seemed larger than usual. Not because of his height or his suit, but because this was not a room men like Richard often entered. Annie saw him notice the thin mattress, the small dresser, the narrow window, the careful way she and her mother had made little space feel orderly. He did not comment on it. She was grateful. "I wanted to give you this before the day gets busy," he said. Annie stood. Richard held out the box. "Your mother's badge." She took it with both hands and opened the lid. The brass badge lay against dark blue velvet. Time had dulled the shine, but the engraved name was clear. Eleanor Carter, Household Supervisor. Annie touched the letters. She thought she lost it, she said. "She left it behind when Carter's kitchen opened. I kept meaning to return it." "Why didn't you?" Richard looked at the badge. "At first, I thought it might make her proud. Later, when the restaurant failed, I worried it might make her feel defeated. So I waited too long." Annie closed the box gently. "Mama will hold this like it's gold. It is worth more than gold in this house." Mrs. Bell looked away toward the window, suddenly interested in the old curtain. Annie held the box to her chest. "Thank you." Richard nodded. "There is something else." He handed her a sealed envelope. Annie's face tensed. "Sir, it is not cash for you to explain to anyone," he said. "It contains travel details, emergency numbers, a letter for your mother, and information for a medical account set up in her name. She may use it for doctors, medicine, transportation, or nothing at all if Pride wins the first round." Despite herself, Annie smiled. "Pride usually wins with Mama." "I know. That is why I wrote the letter carefully." Mrs. Bell folded her arms. "Did you make it sound like charity?" "No." "Good." Annie looked down at the envelope. "What did you call it?" Richard answered, "A continuation of wages owed to a woman whose service to this family exceeded her job description." Mrs. Bell approved with a nod. "That might pass." Annie ran her thumb over the envelope. "I'll give it to her. I also included my direct number and Paul Reeves's office number. If Victoria or anyone connected to her reaches out, you call us." Annie nodded. "Do you think she will?" Richard did not lie. "She may, not because you did anything wrong, because people who lose control often try to regain it by frightening someone else." Clara muttered, "Sounds like her." Mrs. Bell gave Clara a glance, but did not correct her. Richard's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, then silenced it. "Victoria?" Mrs. Bell asked. "Her mother." Annie looked worried. "Is she angry?" "I expect so." "Because of me?" Richard's gaze returned to her. "No. Because her daughter is being held responsible." Annie absorbed that slowly. Richard put his phone away. "You do not need to carry their reaction. You have enough to carry today." For the next hour, the house moved around Annie with purpose. Mrs. Bell labeled her bag. Clara wrapped the sandwiches and tucked in a paper napkin with a small drawing of a flower on it, embarrassed when Annie noticed. Caleb brought the car around early, then came back to carry the quilt and suitcase without asking whether they were heavy. At noon, Richard's attorney arrived through the side entrance. Paul Reeves was in his 60s, neat, gray-haired, with a tired face and kind eyes that had seen enough legal trouble to skip unnecessary drama. He met Annie in the breakfast room, not the study, at Richard's request. "Miss Carter," Paul said, shaking her hand with respect. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Annie was surprised he called her Miss Carter. "Thank you, sir." He placed a folder on the table. "This confirms that Miss Langford is not to contact you. It also confirms that your employment record here remains clean and favorable. No allegation has been made against you. No complaint will be placed in any file. If anyone claims otherwise, call me." Annie stared at the folder. "There's a file?" Paul smiled faintly. "There is now. A protective one." Richard stood near the window, listening. Paul slid a copy toward Annie. "Keep this with your travel papers. You may never need it, but it is better to have truth in writing before lies get dressed up." Annie touched the folder but did not open it. "Thank you." Paul looked at her over his glasses. "Your mother raised you well. People will try to make that sound small. Don't let them." Annie nodded, unable to speak. By 3 o'clock, the sky had cleared, though the wind remained. The car waited near the side entrance rather than the front, not to hide Annie, but because Caleb said the side drive was easier with luggage. Richard insisted on walking her out himself. Mrs. Bell hugged Annie first, stiffly at first, then tighter. "Call when you reach Memphis," she said. "Yes, ma'am. And eat the sandwich before the bread gets sad." Annie smiled through tears. "Yes, ma'am." Clara hugged her next. "I wrote my number on the napkin bag. Not because anything will happen, just because." "Thank you," Annie said. Caleb opened the rear door but looked away politely while Annie wiped her face. Richard stood beside the car with the wooden box in his hand. Annie had left it on the hallway table by mistake. He handed it to her. "You almost forgot the most important thing." She took it and held it close. "Mama would have sent me back for it." "I believe she would." Annie looked up at him. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes?" "When I tell Mama what happened, she might be mad at you." Richard nodded. "She has that right. But I'll tell her you heard me." His face softened. "That matters more than whether she is angry with me." Annie got into the car, the quilt beside her, the envelope and folder on her lap, the badge box held in both hands. As Caleb closed the door, Richard stepped back. The car rolled down the side drive, past the kitchen garden, past the old storage barn Victoria had used as an insult, past the wet leaves gathered near the gate. Annie looked back once. The house stood large and quiet behind her. For the first time, it did not look like a place she had failed to belong. It looked like a place she had survived. Caleb drove without turning on the radio. Annie sat in the back seat with her mother's quilt folded beside her, and the small wooden box resting on her lap. The estate gates opened ahead of them, iron bars sliding apart with a low mechanical sound. She had passed through those gates many times in delivery vans, grocery cars, and once in an ambulance when Mrs. Bell slipped on the back steps, but this was the first time she left with permission to rest. That felt strange. She looked out the window as the long drive gave way to the county road. The old storage barn sat to the right, half hidden behind maples. Its red paint had faded to brown in places, and the double doors were chained shut. Victoria's words tried to rise again, connecting Annie's face to that place, to dirt, to being put outside where people did not have to look. Annie tightened her hand around the badge box. Caleb saw her in the rearview mirror, but did not stare. "You all right back there, Miss Annie?" "I'm okay." "That means no." She gave a small breath that almost became a laugh. "I don't know what I am." "That's fair." The car turned onto a wider road lined with houses set back behind lawns already scattered with leaves. A man in a plaid jacket was raking near a mailbox. A woman in jogging clothes waved to a neighbor. Ordinary life was moving as if Annie's world had not shifted during the night. "Mr. Caleb?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you really mean it? What you said last night? That I'd come get you if anybody bothered you?" "Yes." He nodded. "I don't say things like that for decoration." Annie looked down at the box. "Mama used to make you coffee. Every winter morning I had the early airport run. She'd leave a thermos by the side door and pretend it was extra, wajah it never was." His mouth moved in a quiet smile. "One time I tried to pay her for it. She told me if I insulted her again, she'd put salt in the next batch." Annie smiled. "She would. She looked after people," Caleb said. "Most folks thought that was just her job. It wasn't. It was her way." Annie turned the wooden box in her hands. "I think she got tired. Looking after people can do that. Especially when not enough people look back." Well, the word stayed with her. At the station, Caleb parked close to the entrance and told Annie to stay put while he handled the suitcase. She tried to open her door anyway, but he gave her one look through the window, and she sat back. "Mrs. Bell said you'd try that," he said when he opened the door. "I can carry my own bag." "I know, today you don't have to." Inside the station, the afternoon crowd moved in loose lines beneath the high ceiling. A father held a sleeping toddler against his shoulder. An older couple argued gently over whether they had packed the tickets. A young man in a college sweatshirt dragged 2 suitcases and talked too loudly into his phone. The smell of coffee, raincoats, and warm pretzels filled the air. Annie stayed close to Caleb without meaning to. At the counter, he handed over the travel envelope Richard had prepared. The woman behind the glass checked the reservation and printed the ticket. "Roommate to Jackson connection," she said. "Boarding starts in 20 minutes. Annie's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. 20 minutes? "That's enough time," Caleb said. "Not enough time to worry professionally, but enough time." They found a bench near the platform entrance. Caleb placed her suitcase beside his foot and handed her the paper bag from Mrs. Bell. "Eat something." "I'm not hungry. I was told not to return, unless you ate at least half a sandwich." Annie looked at him. "Mrs. Bell said that?" She used fewer words and more threat. Annie opened the bag. The turkey sandwich was wrapped in wax paper. Clara had tucked the napkin with the small flower drawing on top. Under it was another napkin with Clara's phone number and a note. "Call if you need to talk, even if you don't know what to say." Annie stared at it a long moment. Caleb pretended to study the departure board. She ate 3 bites, then wrapped the sandwich again. "That should count as half." "It does not, but I respect the effort." A boarding announcement crackled overhead. Annie stood, then sat back down. Caleb waited. "I'm scared," she said finally. "Of the train?" "No, of seeing Mama." He nodded slowly. "Because then it becomes real." Annie looked at him. "Yes, it was real already." "I know, but if I tell her everything, she'll hurt too." "She's your mother. She's already hurting because she can hear what you're not saying." Annie swallowed. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. "That's my number. Not the house line. Mine. If anything feels wrong, if someone follows you, if you miss the connection, if you just get turned around, call." Annie took it. "Thank you. And call Mrs. Bell when you board. If you don't, she'll call me. Then she'll call the station. Then she'll call the governor if she can find the number. That made Annie laugh, and the laugh loosened something in her chest. When the train began boarding, Caleb carried her suitcase to the attendant, confirmed her roomette, then stepped back. He did not hug her. He seemed to understand she had already been held by too much emotion. Instead, he took off his cap. "Safe trip, Miss Annie." "Thank you, Mr. Caleb. Tell your mama I said her coffee still beats anything in Chicago." "I will." She stepped onto the train with the wooden box pressed to her chest. The roomette was small, but private. 2 seats faced each other beside a window. A folded bed waited above. Annie set her suitcase in the corner, placed the quilt beside her, and sat down just as the train gave a soft jolt. Through the window, she saw Caleb still on the platform. He raised one hand. She raised hers back. The train began to move. Chicago slid past slowly at first, then faster. Brick buildings, wet streets, warehouses, backyards, flashes of traffic under gray sky. Annie watched until the station was gone. Only then did she take out her phone and call Mrs. Bell. "Well," Mrs. Bell answered. "Are you aboard?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did Caleb get you settled?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you eat?" Annie looked at the sandwich. "Some. I will accept some because I am practicing mercy today." Annie smiled. "Thank you. Call when you reach Memphis." "I will." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Bell's voice softened. "Annie, don't spend the whole ride hearing that woman's voice in your head. Put your mother's voice louder." Annie looked at the badge box. "I'll try. That is enough for today." After the call ended, Annie opened the wooden box again. She traced her mother's engraved name. Eleanor Carter. Household supervisor. She imagined Eleanor younger, standing straighter, wearing the badge on her uniform after the theft. Maybe pretending not to be proud while feeling proud anyway. The train moved south through the afternoon. At Whitmore Estate, Richard watched from his study window long after Caleb's car returned without Annie. The house was quieter now. Not peaceful yet. Peace required more than the absence of Victoria. It required repair. Paul Reeves called just after 5. "Victoria's attorney contacted me," Paul said. "She denies malicious intent. Claims emotional distress. Says you removed her without proper consideration." Richard looked at the papers on his desk. She was given transportation and access through counsel for her belongings. "Yes, legally, you are fine. Socially, expect noise. Let it come. There may be accusations that Annie manipulated you. She did not. I know. I'm telling you what they may say." Richard's hand tightened around the phone. "Then we keep her name out of their mouths. That is the plan." After the call, Richard walked through the house alone. In the front hall, the lilies Victoria had ordered stood in a tall vase. Their smell was too sweet. He asked Clara to remove them. "All of them?" she asked. "All of them." She did not ask why. In the kitchen, Mrs. Bell was making soup. The room felt steadier with her in it. "Annie boarded," she said. "She called?" "Yes." She sounded tired, but not broken. Richard nodded. "Good." Mrs. Bell stirred the pot. "You look like a man who wants to fix the whole world before supper. I would settle for this house. Then start small. Eat soup." "I'm not hungry." Neither was Annie. I bullied her too. Richard sat at the kitchen table. Mrs. Bell placed a bowl before him. For years, he had eaten in dining rooms large enough to make loneliness echo. Tonight he ate soup in the kitchen where the truth had been spoken. It tasted of chicken, carrots, pepper, and something like humility. Mrs. Bell sat across from him with her own cup of tea. "You know," she said, "Eleanor used to say this house had good bones but too many locked doors." Richard looked up. "She said that?" "Once, after your divorce. She didn't mean the doors with keys." He looked toward the hallway. "I suppose she was right. She often was." That night, on the train, Annie unfolded her mother's quilt over her lap and watched the dark fields pass beyond the glass. Her reflection looked back at her from the window. For once, she did not look away quickly. She saw swollen eyes, tired cheeks, a face that had cried and still remained her own. She touched the glass lightly. "No," she whispered again, firmer than in the morning. Then she leaned back as the train carried her toward Mississippi. Toward her mother. Toward the porch where the truth would have to be spoken. And where love, even wounded love, would be waiting. The train reached Memphis before dawn. Annie woke to the sound of brakes and a voice over the speaker, low and rough with mourning. For a moment she did not know where she was. The roomette was dim, her mother's quilt had slipped from her shoulder, and the small wooden box rested beside her on the seat as if it had kept watch through the night. She sat up and looked out the window. The platform lights glowed against the dark. A man in a work jacket pulled a rolling bag behind him. A woman with gray hair held a paper cup of coffee in both hands. Somewhere down the platform, a child laughed, and the sound made Annie think of church basements back home. Folding chairs, pound cake, and women calling everybody baby. Her phone buzzed before she could reach for it. "Mrs. Bell," Annie answered quickly. "I'm in Memphis." "Good," Mrs. Bell said. "You sleep any?" "A little." "Eat?" Annie looked at the paper bag on the small table. "Some." That word again. "I ate the peanut butter." Mrs. Bell sounded satisfied. "Clara will be pleased." She said turkey was too serious for a wounded heart. Annie smiled, still half asleep. "Tell her thank you." "I will." "Your connection leaves in 40 minutes. Stay near the attendant. Keep your bag close. And don't let anybody rush you. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Annie?" "Yes?" "When you see your mama, let her hold you before you start explaining." Annie's throat tightened. "I will." She ended the call and sat still. "Let her hold you." That sounded easy. But Annie knew the moment Eleanor's arms came around her, all the careful words she had practiced on the train would scatter. The connection south felt shorter and longer at the same time. Outside the window, morning spread over fields, gas stations, church signs, low houses, and roads that seemed to remember every car that had ever passed. The farther they went, the more Annie's chest tightened. Chicago had felt like something she was leaving. Mississippi felt like something she had to face. By the time the train slowed near Jackson, she had opened and closed the badge box so many times that the hinge made a tiny complaint. She stepped onto the platform with the quilt over one arm, the suitcase beside her, the envelope from Richard in her purse, and the wooden box pressed against her ribs. Eleanor Carter was waiting near a bench under the station awning. She looked smaller than Annie remembered. That was the first thing Annie noticed, and it frightened her. Her mother wore a brown cardigan over a blue dress, her hair wrapped in a scarf, one hand resting on the handle of a cane she had refused to mention on the phone. Her younger sister, Aunt Lottie, stood beside her with a tote bag and the hard look of a woman ready to fight anyone who had made her family cry. Eleanor saw Annie and tried to stand straighter. Annie stopped walking. For 1 second, they only looked at each other. Then Eleanor opened one arm. Annie crossed the platform so fast the suitcase tipped behind her. Aunt Lottie caught it before it fell, muttering, "Lord, help this child," but Annie barely heard. She reached her mother and bent into her arms. Eleanor held her with surprising strength. One hand pressed against the back of Annie's head, the other against her shoulder. Annie tried to say something, tried to begin with the careful version, but Mrs. Bell had been right. The words left her. She gripped her mother's cardigan and cried into it like she had been waiting since the balcony to become someone's daughter again. Eleanor did not hush her. She only held on and said, "I got you. I got you, baby." Aunt Lottie stood guard beside them, eyes wet and mouth firm. Let it out. Then we'll decide who needs praying for and who needs a talking to." That made Annie laugh through her tears, which made her cry harder. When they finally moved to the car, Aunt Lottie drove because Eleanor was not supposed to. She said this loudly enough for Eleanor to hear and pretend not to. Annie sat in the back with her mother, their hands clasped between them. Eleanor's palm felt thinner, but warm. "Look at me," Eleanor said. Annie turned. Eleanor studied her face the way only a mother could, seeing the swelling around her eyes, the tiredness, the place where shame had tried to settle. "She lied," Eleanor said. Annie's mouth trembled. "She lied before she ever opened her mouth." "You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "No, I want you to hear me with your bones. That woman looked at you and saw what was wrong in herself. Then she tried to put it on you." Annie nodded, tears slipping down again. Aunt Lottie glanced in the mirror. "I never liked women who smile with only their teeth." Eleanor gave her sister a tired look. "Lottie." "What?" "I'm driving. That means I get 1 comment per mile." Annie almost smiled. The drive to Aunt Lottie's house took less than an hour. The house sat off a 2-lane road, white paint weathered at the edges, with a porch that wrapped around one side and 2 old oak trees standing in the yard. A row of jars sat on the kitchen windowsill catching the morning light. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then gave up. Eleanor moved slowly up the porch steps. Annie noticed and tried not to show that she noticed. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, menthol rub, clean laundry, and something simmering low on the stove. A quilt was folded over the couch. A Bible sat open on the side table. Beside it was a small orange bottle of pills. Home, Annie thought, though it was not the house she had grown up in. Aunt Lottie took the suitcase down the hall. "You two sit. I'll heat the biscuits." Eleanor lowered herself into the porch chair by the window and patted the seat beside her. "Come here." Annie sat. For a while, they listened to Aunt Lottie moving in the kitchen. Then Eleanor said, "Tell me all of it." Slow. So Annie did. She told her about the oil and dust from the back hall, about Victoria looking at her uniform, then her face, about the black doormat and the cattle barn, about the balcony, about Richard sitting down beside her as if the words had knocked the air out of him, about Clara confirming it, about Victoria on the phone, about the kitchen, the staff, the ring, and Richard's rule in the main room. Eleanor listened without interrupting. Only her fingers moved, pressing into the arm of the chair. When Annie said Victoria had called Eleanor a failure, the room changed. Eleanor looked toward the kitchen window. Annie wished she had left that part out. "Mama, I'm sorry." Eleanor shook her head. "Don't apologize for repeating poison someone else poured. But it hurt you. It touched an old bruise." "That's different." Aunt Lottie came in with coffee and biscuits. "That woman called you a failure?" Eleanor gave her a warning look. Aunt Lottie ignored it. "No. I'm asking because I want the Lord to hear me ask before I say what I'm thinking." "Lottie," Eleanor said again, but this time Annie heard tired amusement under it. Annie reached into her bag. "Mr. Whitmore sent something." Eleanor's face became guarded at once. "Money? Some papers? A letter?" But first, Annie took out the wooden box. Eleanor stared at it. Her hand went to her chest before Annie opened the lid. The brass badge lay inside, her name still clear. Eleanor did not speak. Aunt Lottie leaned over. "Well, I'll be." Annie placed the box in her mother's lap. "He said your name was never small in that house." Eleanor touched the badge with one finger. Her hand shook. "I thought I lost this." "He kept it safe." Eleanor's eyes filled, but she blinked hard, just as Annie had expected. Aunt Lottie sat down across from them. "Don't you dare hold that in." Crying over honor as aloud. Eleanor let out a breath that broke into a sob. Annie moved to kneel beside her chair, but Eleanor pulled her up and held her close again. The badge rested between them, small and heavy with years. After a long while, Eleanor opened Richard's letter. She read it once silently, then again, slower. Annie waited. "What does it say?" Aunt Lottie asked, though she was already leaning close enough to read upside down. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. "It says he is sorry. It says my medical care is covered through an account in my name. It says I am free to return when well, or retire with support if I choose. It says Annie's wages continue while she is here, and that her school expenses will be handled if she wishes to study." Aunt Lottie sat back. "That is a lot of sorry." Eleanor looked down at the letter. "It is," Annie said softly. "He called it a debt of honor." Eleanor closed her eyes. For years, she had worked in homes where apologies came cheap, if they came at all. People broke things and paid for them. People broke hearts and hoped silence would cover the damage. Richard's letter did not fix everything, but it did not pretend nothing had happened. "I'm still mad at him," Eleanor said. Annie nodded. "He said you had that right." Eleanor looked at her daughter, and something in her face softened. "He said that?" "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor wiped one eye. "That man might be learning." Aunt Lottie handed her a napkin. "At 50, he'd better hurry." Annie laughed. Then Eleanor did too, a small tired laugh that turned into a cough. Annie reached for the water at once. "I'm all right," Eleanor said after drinking. "No, you're resting," Annie answered, firmer than she expected. Eleanor looked at her, surprised. Aunt Lottie smiled. "Listen to that. Chicago put some steel in the girl." Annie looked down, then back at her mother. "No, you did." Eleanor reached for her hand. Outside, the oak leaves moved in a light wind. The porch boards creaked. Somewhere down the road, a truck passed, then faded. Annie sat beside her mother with the badge box on the table, and Richard's letter folded beside it. For the first time in days, Victoria's voice felt far away. Not gone. Not yet. but far enough that Annie could hear other things more clearly. Her mother breathing, Aunt Lottie humming in the kitchen, the wind in the trees, and inside herself, quiet but real, a voice that said she had come home with her name intact. For 3 days, Annie did not speak much about the estate. She helped Aunt Lottie wash dishes, folded towels on the porch, and sat beside Eleanor in the afternoons while the older woman rested in the chair near the window. Sometimes Eleanor slept with one hand still holding the brass badge, as if she feared it might disappear again if she let go. Annie watched her mother's chest rise and fall, listened to the rough places in her breathing, and felt anger return in quiet waves. Not only at Victoria, at every year her mother had stood straight while life asked her to bend. On the 4th morning Richard called. Aunt Lottie answered because Eleanor was eating oatmeal slowly at the kitchen table and Annie was outside shaking crumbs from the porch cloth. Carter residence, Aunt Lottie said, though everyone in the house knew it was her house. Richard's voice came carefully through the line. This is Richard Whitmore. May I speak with Eleanor, if she is well enough? Aunt Lottie looked toward Eleanor. It's him. Eleanor set down her spoon. Put it on speaker. Aunt Lottie raised one eyebrow. You sure? If a man has something to say after all this, let him say it where my daughter can hear it too. Annie stepped back inside just as Aunt Lottie placed the phone in the center of the table. Mr. Whitmore, Eleanor said. Eleanor, Annie, Mrs. Price. Aunt Lottie leaned back. He knows my name. Richard continued. I hope I'm not calling too early. If we're awake, it's not too early, Eleanor said. If we're tired, we'll say so. I understand. Annie stood near the counter, arms folded loosely across her stomach. She had not decided what she felt when she heard his voice. Gratitude, yes. But gratitude had weight now. It sat beside hurt, and both had to share the same room. Richard seemed to know better than to begin with business. How are you feeling, Eleanor? Better than yesterday. Worse than I tell my sister. Aunt Lottie muttered. That last part is the truth. Richard's voice softened. I'm glad you're resting. I am sitting down. That is not always the same as resting. No, it is not. A short silence followed. Then Eleanor asked, Why are you calling, Mr. Whitmore? To update you, Victoria's attorney has been notified. She is not permitted on the estate, and she has been instructed not to contact Annie, you, or any staff member. Her belongings were packed yesterday by Mrs. Bell and her assistant. Caleb supervised the pickup at the gate. Did she come herself? No. Good. There may still be noise, Richard said. From her family. From friends. I don't want any of it reaching you without warning. Aunt Lottie leaned toward the phone. What kind of noise? The kind people make when they want consequences to look like cruelty against them. Eleanor gave a dry little laugh that turned into a cough. Annie moved toward her. But Eleanor waved her off and took water. When she could speak again, she said, That woman will say Annie caused trouble. She may try, Richard said. But she will not do it unanswered. Annie finally spoke. What does that mean? It means there is a written record. Statements from those who heard her. My own statement. Paul Reeves has everything. Your employment record remains clean. If anyone attempts to accuse you, we will respond immediately and formally. Annie looked at her mother. Eleanor's fingers tapped once on the table. A clean record matters. I know, Richard said. A good name matters more. I intend to protect both. Aunt Lottie nodded despite herself. That was well said. Eleanor looked at her sister. Don't encourage him too soon. I'm not. I said one sentence was decent. That's not a parade. For the first time, Annie heard Richard give a small laugh. Not a polite laugh, a tired one, but real. Then he said, Eleanor, I also wanted to ask your permission. That made all 3 women still. My permission for what? Eleanor asked. To establish an education fund in Annie's name. Not public, not charity. She would decide whether to use it for college, vocational training, nursing, business, anything she chooses. I know she came home to care for you, but I don't want what happened in my house to narrow her future. Annie's throat tightened. Mr. Whitmore, this is for you to consider, he said, not pushing. Not decide this second. Eleanor looked at Annie carefully. Do you want school? Annie's first instinct was to say she did not know, because wanting things cost too much. But the train ride had done something to her. It had given her hours of fields passing in the dark, hours to remember the girl she had been before she measured every hope against wages and rent. I think so, she said. What would you study? Aunt Lottie asked. Annie looked down at the table. Maybe nursing or food service management. Mama always said Carter's kitchen failed because the food was ready but the paperwork wasn't. Eleanor's eyes filled. Annie continued, quieter. Maybe one day we could try again. Not right away. Not the same way. But better. Aunt Lottie looked toward the stove as if she needed to check something, though nothing was cooking there. Eleanor reached for Annie's hand. A dream can come back wearing work clothes. Richard was quiet on the phone. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Then the fund will wait until you decide how you want to use it. Eleanor looked at the phone. And what do you want in return? Nothing. That is rarely true. Richard did not rush to answer. Then I will say this carefully. I want the chance to do right where I failed. I want Annie's future not to be reduced by the ugliness she endured under my roof. I want your years of loyalty to be honored while you are alive to see it, not praised after you are too tired to care. The kitchen went quiet. Eleanor's eyes lowered to the brass badge on the table. She touched her engraved name with her thumb. You should have seen sooner, she said. Yes. You should have known a woman doesn't turn mean overnight. Yes. You should have asked more questions when Annie got quiet. Richard's answer came without defense. Yes. Eleanor looked at Annie. Annie gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, not instruction, just permission for the conversation to keep breathing. Then we will consider the fund, Eleanor said. We will not call it charity. No. And Annie decides. Yes. And if she says no, you respect that. I do. Aunt Lottie leaned back. Put that in writing too. I will, Richard said. After the call ended, the house stayed quiet for a long minute. Aunt Lottie broke it first. Well, that was not the worst rich man phone call I've ever heard. Eleanor looked at her. How many rich man phone calls have you taken? Enough church building committees have wealthy donors for me to know tone when I hear it. Annie sat down beside her mother. Do you think it's wrong to accept? Eleanor took her time. I think accepting help from a clean hand is different from begging at a closed door. How do we know his hand is clean? We don't. Not all the way. Eleanor looked out the window at the oak trees, but we know he opened it when it mattered, and we know he admitted where he failed. That counts for something. Annie nodded. Aunt Lottie stood and picked up the empty bowls. It also counts that if you study food service management, Carter's kitchen might rise again, and I personally would like to stop eating biscuits from gas stations when I'm in town. Eleanor gave her a look. My business failed, and you still use it to insult gas stations. I insult everything equally. It's part of my ministry. Annie laughed. This time the laughter did not break into tears. That afternoon, Eleanor asked Annie to walk with her to the porch. It took longer than Annie expected. Her mother moved slowly, one hand on the cane, the other on Annie's arm. The sight hurt, but Eleanor's grip was still firm. They sat side by side beneath the oaks. Sunlight shifted through the leaves, laying broken gold across the porch boards. Across the road, Mrs. Delaney from the next house raised a hand from her mailbox. Eleanor lifted hers back. People will ask why you're home, Eleanor said. I know. What will you say? Annie watched a leaf turn over in the wind. That you needed me. That's true, but not all. I don't want everyone knowing. They don't need to know all. But you don't have to hide like you did wrong. Annie leaned back in the chair. What would you say? Eleanor thought for a moment. I'd say my daughter came home because family comes before pride, and because a house that cannot honor her does not get to keep her. Annie looked at her mother. Eleanor smiled faintly. Too much? No, Annie said. Just enough. Later, while Eleanor napped, Annie took out Clara's napkin and called the number. Clara answered on the second ring. You made it, Clara said. I made it. How's your mama? Stubborn. Good. That means alive. Annie sat on the porch steps. How's the house? Clara was quiet for a second. Different. Mrs. Bell made us clean out the flower arrangements Victoria ordered. Mr. Whitmore ate in the kitchen last night. Caleb says the gate has new instructions. Everyone is walking around like they're afraid to be too loud, but not in a bad way. What does that mean? It feels like after a storm when you're checking what's still standing. Annie understood that. Clara lowered her voice. Victoria's assistant came. She didn't look at any of us. Mrs. Bell made her sign a list for every box. Of course she did. She also kept the silver count sheet on the table the whole time. Annie smiled. Mrs. Bell doesn't miss much. No, Annie? Yes? I'm glad you told him. Annie looked toward the road. I almost didn't. I know. After they hung up, Annie stayed on the porch until the sun moved lower. She thought about school, about Carter's kitchen, about her mother's badge, about Richard's voice saying her future should not be narrowed by what happened in his house. That night, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the letter, the medical papers, and a blank notebook Aunt Lottie found in a drawer. What's that for? Annie asked. Eleanor opened to the first page. If we're considering help, we write down every question. No confusion, no shame, no letting pride make decisions in the dark. Annie sat beside her. At the top of the page, Eleanor wrote, "What do we need to heal?" Below it, after a long pause, Annie wrote, "What do I need to become?" Eleanor read the sentence and placed her hand over Annie's. Outside, the old house settled for the night. In Chicago, the Whitmore estate was doing the same, with fewer flowers, stricter gates, and one empty room where Victoria's things had been. But in Mississippi, under the steady sound of crickets and the low hum of Aunt Lottie washing cups in the sink, Annie felt something she had not felt on the balcony. Not happiness. Not yet. But room. Enough room to breathe. Enough room to imagine that a face once compared to a doormat could still turn toward a future and be seen clearly. A month later, Richard found Annie's letter on his desk before sunrise. Mrs. Bell had placed it beside his coffee, weighed down with the small brass paperweight his father used to keep near the phone. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, and addressed in handwriting that was careful without being stiff. Mr. Richard Whitmore. Whitmore Estate. Chicago, Illinois. Richard stood for a moment before opening it. The house was quiet at that hour. Not the old quiet, the one that had hidden fear beneath polished floors and polite routines. This quiet was different. It had work in it. Repair. People speaking a little more directly. Doors that were no longer closed just because they had always been closed. Victoria's flowers were gone. Her pale curtains had been removed from the morning room. The charity dinner had been canceled with a short statement about a private family matter. Her family had made calls, of course. Some cold, some threatening, some dressed as concern. Paul Reeves answered every one of them until they stopped coming. No public scandal followed. Not because Victoria became kind, but because truth in writing had a way of making lies expensive. Richard opened the envelope. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, Mama says a handwritten letter carries more respect than a phone call when the matter is important. Aunt Lottie says that depends on the handwriting. I am writing anyway." Richard smiled faintly and sat down. Annie wrote that Eleanor was improving. Slowly, not dramatically. There were good mornings and hard afternoons. Some days she ate a full breakfast and argued with Aunt Lottie about salt. Some days she slept until noon and pretended she had only closed her eyes for 10 minutes. The medical account had paid for a new doctor in Jackson, a better inhaler, and tests Eleanor had put off because she did not want to admit the cost scared her. Mama complained about the paperwork, Annie wrote. Then she took the medicine anyway. Richard read that sentence twice. Annie wrote that the badge sat on the small table beside Eleanor's chair. At first, Eleanor kept putting it back in the box. Then Aunt Lottie placed it upright against the lamp and said, "If Honor is going to visit, let it sit where people can see it." Eleanor grumbled, but she did not move it. There was more. Annie had visited a community college with her aunt. She had not enrolled yet, but she had spoken to an advisor about nursing and food service management. She wrote that she still did not know which road was hers, but for the first time, both roads felt possible. She and Eleanor had also started a notebook for Carter's kitchen. Not a lease, not a business plan yet, just recipes, costs, questions, and mistakes from the first time that would not be allowed to repeat themselves. "A dream can come back wearing work clothes," Annie wrote. Mama said that. I think she is right. Richard leaned back in the chair and looked toward the window. Morning light was beginning to show along the trees. He continued reading. "I used to think a house was safe because it had locks and cameras. Now I know a house is only safe when the people inside refuse to let cruelty stay." He stopped. The sentence sat on the page, plain and steady. It was not written to impress him. That was why it did. Annie ended the letter simply. "Thank you for hearing me when I did not know if anyone would. Respectfully, Annie Carter." Richard folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again and read the last line one more time. "Thank you for hearing me." He set the letter down and covered his eyes with one hand. He had been thanked in his life for donations, investments, Speeches, hospital wings, scholarships, buildings with plaques and names carved into stone. None of those thanks had felt like this. This one carried mercy he had not earned in full. A knock came at the study door. "Come in," he said. Mrs. Bell entered with a second cup of coffee she knew he did not need but would drink because she brought it. "You read it?" she asked. "Yes." "How is Eleanor?" "Better. Stubborn." Mrs. Bell nodded. "Then better. Annie is looking at school." "Good. And Carter's kitchen may not be dead." Mrs. Bell's face softened. "Some things only look buried because they're waiting for better soil." Richard looked at her. "You and Eleanor should have written sermons. No one would have paid us enough." He smiled, then handed her the letter. "She gave me permission to share this part with you." Mrs. Bell read the lines about the house being safe only when cruelty was not allowed to stay. She stood very still afterward. "That girl has her mother's spine," she said. "Yes. And some of her own." Richard nodded. "Yes." Mrs. Bell folded the letter and returned it. "What will you do now?" It was a question people had been asking him in different forms for a month. What would he do with the cancelled wedding? What would he do with the estate? What would he do about Victoria's family? What would he do with the loneliness that had led him to mistake performance for kindness? But Mrs. Bell meant something else. Richard looked around the study. The walnut shelves. The locked drawers. The desk where Eleanor once placed stolen keys. For years he had protected objects and called that responsibility. He had protected wealth, reputation, family history. He had protected everything but the quietest people in the house. "I start here," he said. "With what?" "With employment contracts. Clear complaint procedures. Outside review. Better leave policies. Education assistance for household staff. Not just executives. And no one living in a room I wouldn't offer a guest in an emergency." Mrs. Bell listened without smiling. "That sounds expensive," she said. "It should have been expensive to ignore it." She gave him a long look. "Now that sounds like a sermon. I had good teachers. Don't get sentimental before breakfast." He almost laughed. Over the next weeks, the estate changed in ways guests might not notice at first. The service rooms were repainted and refurnished. The narrow room where Annie had slept was kept empty until Eleanor could decide what to do with the things left there. The staff received written policies, not because paper created decency, but because decency without structure often depended on the mood of whoever held power. Mrs. Bell became household director, a title she claimed was too grand until Richard told her it came with a raise. Then she said titles were a burden she would bear for the good of the house. Caleb added new gate procedures and made everyone learn them, including Richard. Clara enrolled in evening classes with help from the new education benefit. Mr. Henson, the gardener, asked whether the benefit applied to certification in landscape management. Richard said yes. Mr. Henson cried behind the greenhouse and denied it later. The house did not become perfect. No house does. People still misplaced keys. Coffee still went cold. Old habits still rose and had to be corrected. But the silence changed. When something was wrong, it had somewhere to go. In Mississippi, Eleanor gained weight slowly. She hated that everyone noticed, and hated more that everyone was pleased. Annie sent updates every Sunday. Sometimes a note, sometimes a photograph. One showed Eleanor on the porch beneath the oak trees, the brass badge pinned to her cardigan as a joke Aunt Lottie had started and Eleanor pretended not to enjoy. Another showed Annie standing outside the community college office with a folder in her hand and nervous pride in her eyes. The final photograph arrived 3 months after the night on the balcony. Annie stood beside Eleanor and Aunt Lottie in front of a small rented storefront on a quiet street. The windows were dusty. The paint needed work. The sign above the door was blank. On the back, Annie had written, "Not open yet, not even close, but we are asking the right questions this time." Richard placed the photo beside her letter in the top drawer of his desk, next to the record of the night Victoria left. Not to keep the pain alive, but to remember what it had required of him to stop looking away. One Sunday afternoon, he drove alone to the old storage barn at the edge of the estate. The doors had not been opened in months. Leaves had gathered along the threshold. He stood there, thinking of the insult Victoria had chosen, the way she had tried to tie Annie's face to something cast out and unworthy. The barn was empty except for old tools, cracked crates, and furniture no one had used in years. Richard looked at it for a long time, then called Mrs. Bell. "I want the barn cleared," he said. "For what?" "A training kitchen, for staff, local students, Anyone from the community program who needs space. Mrs. Bell was silent. Then she said, Eleanor will have things to say about that. I expect so. And Annie? I hope she'll visit one day and tell us what we did wrong. Mrs. Bell chuckled. That would be worth the renovation. By spring, the old barn no longer looked like a place for forgotten things. It had wide windows, work tables, stoves, shelves, and a small sign near the door, the Carter Learning Kitchen, in honor of Eleanor Carter. For those whose work deserves dignity and whose dreams deserve room, Richard did not hold a large ceremony. Eleanor would have hated that. Instead, he invited the staff, a few community leaders, and the Carter women. Eleanor arrived with Annie on one arm and Aunt Lottie on the other, pretending she had not cried in the car. When Eleanor saw the sign, she stopped walking. Richard approached slowly. If it is too much, we can change it. Eleanor stared at the words. No. Aunt Lottie dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She means no, don't touch it. Not no, she hates it. I understood, Richard said. Annie looked at the building, then at him. This used to be the old barn. Yes. Her eyes met his. She knew. Of course she knew, Richard said. Some places need new meaning. Annie nodded, and after a moment, she smiled. Not the careful smile she once wore in the estate, but one that belonged fully to her. Later, when people gathered inside, Mrs. Bell asked Eleanor to say a few words. Eleanor refused. Aunt Lottie said, She has words. She's just making them suffer first. At last, Eleanor stepped forward. She looked at the tables, the young faces from the community program, the staff standing with shoulders a little straighter, and Richard waiting near the back. I don't have a speech, she said. I only know this. Work should not make a person small, service should not make a person invisible, and no one's child should have to ask if their face is something dirty. The room went still. Eleanor reached for Annie's hand. My daughter came home hurt, she continued, but she did not come home broken. That matters. Because people can hurt you with words, but they do not get to name you unless you answer to it. Annie squeezed her mother's hand. Eleanor looked toward Richard, and a man with power did what power is supposed to do. He stopped the harm when he saw it. I wish he had seen sooner. Richard bowed his head once, but he saw, Eleanor said, and then he acted. That is not nothing. No one clapped at first. The words needed space. Then Mrs. Bell began, softly, and the others followed. Annie stood beside her mother as the sound filled the renovated barn. She looked through the windows toward the estate, toward the balcony she had not visited since that night. She remembered sitting there with tears on her sleeves, asking if her face looked like a doormat. She wished she could go back to that version of herself, not to erase the pain, but to sit beside her and say, Wait, someone is coming, and one day, you will stand in the very place they tried to send your shame, and it will carry your mother's name. Richard watched Annie from across the room. He knew the story would live differently in each person who had touched it. For Victoria, perhaps it would always be humiliation. For him, it would remain a warning. For Eleanor, a wound and an honor tangled together. For Annie, maybe one day, it would become proof that the worst sentence spoken over her had not become the final one. A house is not clean because its floors shine. A name is not small because someone tries to spit on it. A face is not dirty because cruel eyes refuse to see its beauty. Annie Carter had never been dirty. The only thing dirty in that house was the heart that tried to make her believe she was. The lesson of this story is that cruelty often hides behind polite smiles, soft voices, and beautiful appearances. True kindness is not proven by how someone behaves in public, but by how they treat people who have less power than they do. Annie's pain reminds us that words can wound deeply, especially when they attack a person's dignity, race, or worth. Richard's decision shows that justice does not always need to be loud, but it must be firm. A good home, a good family, and a good society are not built by wealth or status. They are built when people refuse to stay silent while someone else is being humiliated. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.